Shalom, everyone, and thank you for joining us today at the second annual Pulse of Israel conference in our beautiful biblical ancestral homeland Israel, in our beautiful biblical and indivisible capital Jerusalem since King David's time. This conference is taking place in the middle of an existential war that our holy I was hoping it would be easier than this. That our holy IDF soldiers are currently mostly fighting right now in Gaza and also preparing possibly to fight up north in Lebanon as well. However, for those who really understand, we're really talking about a seven-front war against a Shiite Iran and a Sunni Qatar Muslim Brotherhood alliance to literally destroy Israel. And it's not just our war, but a war of good against evil for humanity, where we, the Jewish people here in Israel, are literally the front line of the whole freedom-loving world against an emboldened Marxist Islamist revolution out to destroy the whole freedom-loving world, with the United States actually as its main target. What are we? Well, that's why the protests on the U.S. college campuses today also include messages about supporting the destruction of America, which Iran has been clear for decades about destroying, as well as they call America the big Satan and Israel little Satan. We, the Jewish people in Israel, we're just the appetizer, the canary in the coal mine, with our holy IDF soldiers fighting on the physical front line as the leaders of the freedom-loving world ignore this reality and tie Israel's hands behind our back in trying to end this war to protect us all. And all this while we also still have captives in Gaza. Before we begin, I just want to ask Hashem to look over our holy IDF soldiers, assist them in achieving complete victory over our enemies, so that the Jewish people never again experience another rocket attack or terror attack ever again, and that He watch over all of our captives in Gaza so that we can bring them all home as soon as possible. I first want to thank my whole staff working hard on this conference and highlight my partner Avi Nadel, Rachel Moore and her staff for organizing the conference, our interns, my wife Rachel for everything, my parents for everything, my children, and to Hashem above for everything. On a personal note, this conference takes place as my wife and I have two sons fighting in Gaza right now. Two sons who are part of a generation of proud Jewish King David-like warriors, a generation of heroes, a generation that demands victory, literally paying the price, risking their own lives, paying that price for the mistakes, weakness, appeasement, weakening of the Jewish identity and sense of purpose of previous generations of Israeli and Jewish leaders. I think it is quite clear that the war we are fighting today would not have happened if not for the mindset that led to the disastrous Oslo Peace Accords of 1993, that many of our political, military, and community organizational leaders around the world are still stuck in, unable to pull us out of. To me, it never made sense to give guns and land to a sworn enemy with literal Jewish blood on their hands, while ignoring what they say in their native Arabic language to their own. Shimon Peres and his band of Oslo merry men were right about one thing, that you make peace with your enemy, but they were totally wrong about its application. You only do so after you defeat your enemy so bad that they then come begging to surrender under your terms with no expectation of even being able to make any demands. You definitely do not give those enemies guns and land to continue their genocidal agenda to destroy you. Israel still has not had that victory over our enemies, making sure that they understand that the Jewish state of Israel is here to stay, with no chance of them achieving our destruction. That is what is needed at the end of the current fighting of today's war, which, as I like to tell people, is really the 77th year of our war of independence. Because the 1948 war never ended. We're still fighting it. Every few years it is a new battle with changes to the faces and names for the enemy, but it's the same war with the same enemy, a segment of the Arab Muslim world unable to accept the reality of a Jewish state back sovereign in our ancestral homeland. The sad truth is that the Oslo peace process was really never about trying to even achieve peace. Ron Pundak, one of the architects of the Oslo peace process, stated himself in an interview back in 2014 that the Oslo peace process was really about Israelizing Israel, in a sense, to stop Israel from turning too Jewish. That also explains Shimon Peres's line after he lost the 1996 elections to Benjamin Netanyahu, when Shimon Peres famously said, "The Israelis lost that election and the Jews won." Ultimately, beyond the physical war our sons, husbands, friends, neighbors, fathers are fighting right now, we are experiencing a spiritual war. A battle that we are winning, as more Jews in Israel and around the world are strengthening their Jewish identity, strengthening their connection to their ancestral homeland Israel, and strengthening their understanding of the importance of a thriving Israel as a strong Jewish country. It is just so sad that it has taken the horrible massacre of Simchat Torah, October 7th, 2023, and the growing Jew-hating anti-Semitism in its wake for the growth of this spiritual process we are going through right now. That is the internal spiritual war that is the undercurrent of the physical war. And that is why I tell people in my daily Pulse of Israel program that we are ultimately winning this war, and we will win it. Because the Jewish people today are stronger and more united than ever before in our identity as a proud Jewish people and in our joint sense of national purpose in our ancestral homeland. And despite the challenges that are still to come, the trajectory is a positive one, and we will win. The sooner more Jews join in understanding our true purpose and vision, we will achieve total victory in the physical war and bring in the future a proud and strong Jewish state of Israel. Despite the crazy, traumatic times that we are living in, we, the Jewish people in our ancestral homeland Israel, have a bright and strong future ahead of us. And that is exactly what our focus is going to be tonight. So thank you to each and every one of you for joining us here in the Begin Center in Jerusalem, and everyone watching all over the world, wherever you are, and we have people watching from countries all over the world, to join with us tonight in hearing, spreading, and sharing this message. This year's conference is about next steps, Israel's roadmap to true independence. Why are we focusing on this topic this year? Well, for two reasons. Reason number one, unfortunately, it is clear to see that Israel does not have the diplomatic independence or geopolitical flexibility to win this war properly in order to protect us. With a Biden administration constantly acting as the negotiator for Hamas and Iran and pressuring Israel to constantly appease those evil actors instead of doing the opposite, it is clear that we are far from having the independence necessary to protect Israeli civilians. And that is a problem that our leaders must be focused on fixing as soon as possible. Reason number two, because personally, I'm tired of seeing a majority of official voices for the state of Israel and the Jewish people focus 99.9% of their time on trying to defend Israel against the daily barrage of lies pushed out by our enemies and pumped out by media channels and politicians all over the world. Israel and the Jewish people must go on the offense and stop the focus on hasbara, trying to explain away the daily lies. It is way past time that the Jewish people and the Jewish state of Israel focus on providing a steady and strong offense with a vision of strength, based on our proud Jewish historic identity connected to our ancestral homeland, and cut down at the knees the narrative of lies piled against us on a daily basis. Only by constantly providing a proud offense and standing up for ourselves will we spare spokespeople and laymen the time of having to run around looking for the facts to disprove the constant barrage of lies. I will give one simple example. Anytime Israel is blamed and shamed for killing non-combatants in Gaza, there should only be one response from the IDF, from Israeli government officials, and from Jewish organizations and influencers. Not, we will look into it. Not, we take responsibility and, if necessary, we'll punish the IDF soldiers involved. And not by saying, well, say that the numbers are unreliable, since they come from the Gaza Ministry of Health, which we all know are Hamas, and hence unreliable. No. All those claims force Jews worldwide to play defense, and force us to play defense, and let Hamas off the hook. There's only one response, and that is, don't you dare blame Israel for anyone killed in Gaza. 100% of the blame lies with Hamas. This is a war started by Hamas, who use their own non-combatants as human shields, continue to do so. They started this war by infiltrating Israel and massacring over 1,200 innocent Israelis on October 7th. And they can end this war, and this is all part of the message we're supposed to be giving our officials, all by doing one thing, surrendering all their weapons and returning our captives. Anyone interested in ending the death of non-combatants in Gaza should pressure their governments and their journalists to start reporting the truth and pressure Hamas to surrender and release our captives. That is the only way to stop people from being killed in this war started by Hamas. That should have been the only response of every single IDF, Israeli government, Jewish organizational spokesperson, influencer since day one. Yet it wasn't, and still today, 9 months into this war, it still hardly is. This is why our conference this year is focused on going on the offense, by providing a roadmap for a proud and strong Israel with the inspiring, politically incorrect truth that people are starving to hear. And believe it or not, one of the people out there who is saying this truth proudly happens not even to be Jewish, and his name is Douglas Murray. And another person who happens to be saying this also unapologetically happens to be Jewish, thank God, and he is with us tonight, and that is Michael Rappaport. And who are we? We are the pulse of Israel, on the front line of the media war for Israel, providing hope by sharing the inspiring, politically incorrect truth that is sorely lacking in the public sphere, in the Jewish sphere, in the Israel sphere. Now, I want everyone to come tonight with an open mind, because we have all been trained to think realistically. And that realistic thinking has been literally killing us since the disastrous Oslo Accords were signed in 1993, and continues to lead to Jews being killed every day. And stay with me. We were trained to believe that giving guns, land, and money to known terror entities is the realistic path to peace. We were trained to think that appeasing terrorists and terror organizations and literally financing them to pay terrorists, aka pay to slay, is realistic, since that is the only way the international community will support us. We have been trained to forget and ignore the fact that our Arab Muslim neighbors were massacring us here in our ancestral homeland of Israel back in the 1920s and 1930s, decades before the State of Israel was established in 1948, and decades more before Israel liberated Judea and Samaria and Gaza in 1967 and established the first Jewish resettled communities in our ancestral and biblical areas of Judea, Samaria, and Gaza. Forget history, facts, and justice that prove that the two-state solution is a dangerous delusion that totally misses the problem needed to be solved. We must ignore all that and be realistic. We have been trained to be realistic that we must accept the existence of a historic people called Palestinians who have a claim to our ancestral homeland, even though British mandate immigration records prove that a vast majority of the Arabs came to this land in the beginning of the 20th century from all over the Middle East, proving that there is no such historic people called Palestinians. All one has to do is check the archives of the New York Times and other media outlets before 1948 to see that all references to Palestinians referred to the Jews. But no, we have to be realistic, ignore reality, and talk about this fake people as if they really exist. But guess what? Over 7 million Jews living in a region of the world surrounded by billions of people who don't want us here is not so realistic. Yet we are here, a thriving Jewish state in a sea of Arab Muslim countries. Winning the War of Independence in 1948 was not realistic. Winning the miraculous Six-Day War and coming back to also miraculously win the Yom Kippur War were not realistic. The Jewish people surviving 2,000 plus years of continuous exile and persecution all over the world to still be here today is not realistic. It is time that we remember and internalize the famous line of founding Israeli Prime Minister David Ben-Gurion, and I quote, "In Israel, in order to be a realist, you must believe in miracles." That is the Jewish realism. We are Jews. We are the Jewish people. We are the biggest success story of humanity. A people that returned to our ancestral homeland as sovereign after 2,000 plus years of exile and persecution, and the world calls us the colonizers, the outsiders. We should be the poster child of today's university professors, teaching their students to learn from the Jewish people how to overcome oppression and focus on moving forward and doing good for humanity, instead of teaching them that we, the Jews, and the state of Israel are the epitome of evil in the world today. We are the envy of every indigenous people in the world, as we, and correct me if I'm wrong, anyone, are the only indigenous nation to have returned as sovereign in our ancestral ancient homeland, back with our holy sites. How is our reality one big miracle? Because of one thing, because of God above. And we can't be embarrassed to say that publicly. Because we defy realism. We are a people with a purpose. That is what we were chosen for. A chosen people with a chosen homeland to fulfill a chosen purpose while living in our ancestral homeland. And that is what we need our leaders to be talking about, to us and to the world, not wasting their time fighting the daily barrage of lies spread about us and feeling forced into realistic solutions like Oslo, the Gaza disengagement, which I call the exile, the ceasefires with Hamas and Hezbollah that endanger our lives by kicking the real problems down the road and instead making our situation that much worse. So why is this conference so important? Because I know of other conferences that take place in Israel that ignore our Jewish story and ignore our purpose as a Jewish people resettling our ancestral homeland. Instead, they recycle speakers, world leaders, failed ideas, and failed solutions, all responsible for the disastrous situation that we are in today that brought about the October 7th massacre and that led us to have a small army unprepared to fight the seven front war we are fighting without Israel's full dependence on the United States, and a situation that we are dependent on fellow Jews around the world having to donate money and purchase supplies for our holy IDF soldiers to have to use to fight this war. Ultimately, October 7th did not have to happen. So many Israelis were out in the streets warning about the disastrous Oslo peace process that brought about terror and death, but not peace. Millions of Israelis were protesting, majority, at least half of Israel, were protesting against the 2005 disengagement from Gaza, warning that it would turn Gaza into a terror base that would endanger all of Israel and not turn Gaza into the Singapore of the Middle East. Half of Israel protested against leaving southern Lebanon, that it would turn that area also into a terror launching pad. But the realistic experts wouldn't listen. Instead, they relied on messianic dreams of peace with terrorists, relied on international promises that have been broken, on diplomatic international resolutions that have been ignored, like 1701 regarding southern Lebanon, and instead on investing in developing defensive technologies to protect us. Still today, most of the realistic political and security experts have yet to admit the horrific mistakes of Oslo, the Gaza disengagement, and the South Lebanon pullout 9 months into this war that we're fighting on 7 fronts that our security leaders still don't know if we can win. And the biggest mistake of all, ignoring the fact that the Palestinian national identity is the biggest and most successful blood libel in Jewish history, motivating people all over the Western world with no understanding of facts or history to attack Jews and feel socially vindicated for doing so. And again, all being done with the silence of our own leaders, political, security, communal, organizational. This is exactly what we focused upon at our conference last year titled Unmasking Anti-Semitism Behind the Palestinian National Movement. So I want everyone to begin this night thinking big, thinking different, thinking Jewish, and have an open mind to publicly voicing the true Jewish realism and solutions that we need to develop the true independence as a sovereign nation to defend ourselves properly and fulfill our purpose as the Jewish people back sovereign in our ancestral homelands. We might not be able to implement these solutions tonight, tomorrow, next month, or next year, but I promise you one thing. If we do not start talking out loud proudly about what we really need to do, then it definitely will never happen. The change starts with us talking about what really, truly needs to be done. And it starts by reminding our leaders who we are and why we live here in our ancestral homeland, because many of them, unfortunately, need to be reminded. Now, I want to start this conference with our first speaker, Amir Avivi, to give us his perspective on the only solution for Gaza at the end of this war. And for those of you not familiar with Aviv, and Aviv wanted to be here tonight, but he ended up flying out this evening. And I don't know why I don't have his bio right here with me, so forgive me. I met Amir a number of years ago when he was basically not really well known. He just had started the Bitronistim organization, which, believe it or not, was so needed for many years. Because I don't know how many of you have been in Israel all these years, but when it came to Oslo, the disengagement, the southern Lebanon pullout, we're always bombarded with ads put out by organizations run by senior IDF experts, retired or whatever. And they always supported Oslo. It's going to be in Israel's benefit. They always supported the disengagement. They always supported everything bad for Israel. They always supported. And there was never a voice for the senior IDF officials who thought otherwise. And that's what the Bitronistim is all about. That's what Amir Avivi has thousands of senior IDF officers a part of, finally having that voice of a rational, Jewish, and true perspective of how we defend ourselves. And we have a video from Amir Avivi right now.
So what is the viable solution for existing in security and prosperity in the land of Israel? So what is the viable solution for existing in security and prosperity in the land of Israel? Basically, there are 3 models. One model is a separation model, which means we are on one side of the border, Palestinians on the other side. This we did in Gaza. Devastating. This model is not viable. If we would have done that in Judea and Samaria, Israel basically would have ceased to exist. If Hamas had 17 years to build in the mountains of Judea and Samaria, where we defeated empires, what they built in Gaza, in this shallow, small place on the sea, 20 IDF couldn't deal with this. It's not an option. Separation is not an option. So the next option is military control. Where did we see models of military control in the Middle East? Iraq, Afghanistan, Lebanon, South Lebanon, Americans, Russians, Israelis, and it all looks the same. There is no legitimacy over time. So basically, if you control an area that you don't think it's yours, you retreat eventually. And if you retreat, you go back to separation, which basically means let's all of us die. It's not an option. So really the only viable option in the land of Israel is a full security control of Israel, of the IDF, all over the land of Israel. And by the way, this includes also the border with Egypt in Rafah, in Gaza. It should include complete freedom of operation of the IDF everywhere, whether it's in Judea and Samaria or Gaza. We need to be responsible of the security, but we also need massive presence of towns, of Jews everywhere, in order to thrive, in order the roads to be alive, and really control the area. The IDF is not controlling Judea and Samaria, it's the towns. It's hundreds of thousands of cars that drive along the roads, that keep it alive. It's the presence of towns along the main roads. This is what creates security, and it's not only about Judea and Samaria. It's the same in the Negev. It's the same in the Galil. And along this model, we should seek solutions to the Israeli-Palestinian conflict, solutions like Emirates, city-state, for example, or some kind of San Marino state, meaning a state that is really without an army, without airspace, surrounded by Israel. We have a lot of models like that around the world. So we really, really need to think this through and make sure that Israel is secure and prosperous for generations to come.
So I don't know how many of you picked up on Amir Avivi's solution, because he basically explained there is only one realistic solution, and that is for us to resettle the Gaza Strip with Jewish settlements. And again, Amir explains it very well, laying out the options, that anyone who thinks it's realistic to protect Israel without resettling Jewish settlements in the Gaza Strip is not being realistic. To add to Amir Avivi's important words, just last week, Moti Elmoz, Brigadier General in Reserve, said on Reshet Bet Israeli video, talking about our Arab Muslim enemies, they don't care about life. They only care about land. The only solution to Gaza is by taking Gaza away from them. And he continued, 9 months into this war, we should have already harvested the wheat in Beit Hanun already in this war. This is the time to use language they understand. That's why we have to tell the truth. And taking over Gaza, resettling Gaza, is the only military solution to protecting Israel with a resettlement of Jewish communities. But even more important is Israel telling the world that Gaza is historically Jewish. And I don't know how many people know this, because only I learned about all these various facts, and there's so much more. Rabbis during the Talmud lived in Gaza. There's a mosaic of King David found in an ancient synagogue in Gaza City, built in 508 CE, today on display at the Museum of the Good Samaritan between Jerusalem and Jericho. Has anyone seen that? Go see it. Gaza Synagogue, 508 CE. We belong in Gaza because Gaza is Jewish land, and because the only way Israel can protect us is by having a military and civilian presence in Gaza. So Jewish communities in Gaza are only a matter of time. Just like it took time and civilian efforts for the resettling of Jewish communities in Judea and Samaria, so too with Gaza. It is only a matter of time, and it's up to us, because there is no other realistic solution for Gaza. And my proposition is simple. Anyone who believes in the Islamic ideology of killing Jews and destroying Israel, they live in places that agree with that ideology. They don't live in Gaza, they don't live in Judea and Samaria, or anyone else in Israel. And all those Arab Muslims who understand how blessed they are to live with us, they get Israeli citizenship. And believe it or not, there aren't that many of them. There are some, but they're the minority. To me, what is unrealistic is trying to win a war by pulling our holy IDF forces out of areas in Gaza after our IDF soldiers risk their lives in clearing them, only to have us leave and then have our enemy return to those same areas for the terrorists to come back and terrorize us. That doesn't sound like a sound military strategy to me, and I'm no IDF general. Then we have the calling out of the hypocrisy of the whole situation. I don't know, just a number of years ago, the whole world was dealing with Ukrainian refugees. The whole world opened up its arms. Yes, of course. We want to get people out of a war zone. Everyone, take in Ukrainian refugees. A number of years back, we had the Syrian war. Over 500,000 Arabs were murdered by the Syrian regime. There too, the world opened up their arms. Oh, let's get as many people out of the war zone. So Syrian refugees were taken all over the world. All of a sudden, when it comes to our war and Gaza, no, this is the only conflict where the world's not allowed to take in any refugees to save their lives from being in a war zone. The world is complicit in allowing those civilians to be used as human shields, and hence used by Hamas as part of their PR war to make Israel look bad. Doesn't look good, and it is a clear sign to me how the world is not looking out for our interest or wanting to save lives and end this conflict. Now I want to invite Israeli MK Simcha Rothman to speak about a vision for Israel's justice system and defense establishment to achieve sovereignty in Israel. And Simcha as well, I had the pleasure of meeting and interviewing a number of times for my Pulse of Israel program before the rest of the world got to know about him as well as I did, him being elected to the Knesset, because for years, Simcha has been working on the inequality of Israel's justice system and the need to work on fixing it so that Israel's democracy could be much more democratic. With that, I'd like to invite Simcha over to you.
Erev Tov, good evening. I think that what we are facing now is, in the world, is the lack of moral clarity, which is supposed to be the basic element of every justice system. It's not by chance that when Israel needed its what for many years was called the legal Iron Dome, the justice system, it was abandoned. And I have to explain what does it mean. For many years, Israel was not able to really fight terror. Some of it because of outside pressure, of course, and many people ask the question, what happened in October 7th? Why didn't Israel do anything before October 7th? We all knew, we had the intel. It's a good question. But the answer is, just imagine what would happen. Just imagine. On October 1st, you would have the Israeli Prime Minister, Benjamin Netanyahu, standing and having a press conference saying, as we speak now, our forces are invading Gaza and destroying all the arsenal because we have intel that they want to attack us and do horrible things to our citizens in the surrounding of Gaza. Just imagine what would happen from outside. How would Biden react? How would the UN react? How would Europe react? It would be total mayhem. What would happen from the inside? I'll leave it also to your imagination. We know how the people who were protesting against the government, against judicial reform, against other issues, how would they react? They would say, oh, this extremist government, they're attacking Gaza that people will not do anything about the judicial reform. They are trying to confuse us. It would come from the internal front also. And of course, the justice system almost immediately will get into its regular way of doing business and immediately will get appeals. Why are you stopping electricity to Gaza? An appeal that happened in the past. Why don't you pass them water? Appeal that happened in the past. Why don't you pass them humanitarian aid? Happened in the past, happened last week. Why are you killing terrorists? Happened in the past. Why? All of this are real case law. Why? What is your rules of engagement? Are they reasonable? Again, everything happened in the past. That's case law in Israel. Only in Israel, by the way. There is no other country where those kind of issues will ever get to a court. So is that what would have happened if Israel would do the right thing and do preemptive attack in October 1st? It did not happen. Some of it because of those reasons, some of it because the belief that is with the state of Israel, basically since the Oslo Accords, that if you are running away from your problems, they won't come down to hunt you. But that's history. We are after October 7th. But for many, many years, the limits that the justice system put on Israeli IDF and Israeli government had one big excuse. They said, we are limiting you in fighting terror because this is the legal and judicial Iron Dome that will protect Israel from the ICC and the ICJ. That was the claim. I have to say, even when I pushed forward the judicial reform, there were meetings in the Constitution Committee that people, legal advisors from all branches of security establishment told me, listen, when you're pushing it forward, just know that it might endanger the Iron Dome, the legal Iron Domes that the justice system creates for Israel. And we try to figure it out, what kind, don't touch the criminal law. But at the end, nothing has been done in matter of limiting the ability of the justice system to prosecute war crimes. As a matter of fact, the other way around exactly, and it was not even in the plans. But the ICC, we see how it worked. It did not work. The ICC is planning to have an arrest warrant for Netanyahu and comparing him to Hamas people, and for Gallant and comparing him to Hamas people. The ICJ, despite the fact that the only nation that suffered and still suffers the threat and the actual reality of genocide for so many years is the Jewish people, then we are the only nation that actually had huge genocide during the Holocaust, and since then we are in a constant danger for genocide, and yet the ICJ is also against us. So we don't have this Iron Dome. So we are limiting ourselves in fighting terror in a way that no other country does, on the excuse that it will help some distant time in the future to protect us from the ICJ and the ICC, and at the end, it does not. And that's because the Israeli justice system basically lost the idea of justice in many aspects, but I don't want to talk about the many aspects. On the many aspects, we will deal after the war. The only reason I'm talking about this in this time is because we are, during wartime, in a situation that the court is actually limiting, the court and the legal advisor are actually limiting the ways Israel can fight to bring back the hostages and to eliminate terror. Walid Daka is a terrorist. He was involved in kidnapping and murdering Moshe Tamam, a soldier, and torturing him. He was involved in this. He was in prison. He was the only terrorist that Hamas asked by name to be released in the hostage deal. It was the only one. And he died in prison recently. Baruch Hashem. And And the IDF said, we want to hold to his body because we want the Hamas to pay with hostages, or at least hostages, sadly, we know some of them are not alive anymore, some hostages' bodies in return. So we need him. We cannot release him just like that. He's important to Hamas, and we know for a fact that he is important to Hamas. And the Supreme Court said, oh, well, maybe it's not legal. Which chapter in the law do you think covered this gruesome situation of holding to a body in a hostage deal? Did anyone ever plan for this kind of legislation? Is it supposed to be, in other countries, this issue will be unjusticiable. You don't take these issues to court. That does not make any sense to bring those issues to court. But the court not only took this issue, but is actually debating maybe to release the body of a terrorist, a convicted terrorist, for free. How do we expect the IDF to fight this war, to get back the hostages? How do we expect it? And this is one example. We can talk about other examples. But this issue brought me back to 2011, 2012, when there was the hostage deal when Gilad Shalit was released. I was one of the lawyers who appealed against it. And my claim was, and it was actually based very strongly in the law, that you cannot release terrorists, and especially not in the manner that it happened, because it's illegal. They were sentenced and they should stay in prison. You cannot release them, not even during a hostage deal. And I was right. How do I know I was right? Because 2 years or 3 years after, the law was amended to exactly allow for what was not allowed at the time. It was not allowed at the time. It was very clear. But the court said, and I have to say, it made sense, I'm not going to talk about the legal issues, because the commitment that the government have to release Gilad Shalit is basically unjusticiable. So despite the fact that it was illegal to release Yahya Sinwar from prison, it was illegal. The court said, I'm not interfering in this because I don't want to stop the government effort to bring back Gilad Shalit. Again, I think it was a terrible mistake. I think it created October 7th. The fact that we released more than 1,000 terrorists for one soldier created the backbone of October 7th in Gaza and created the reason to go and kidnap other soldiers and citizens and the motive to do so. I think it was a huge mistake, but it was a mistake by the government, not by the court. And the court says, I'm stepping out of it. And the court was right in doing so. But suddenly, the court forgot that he should sometimes step out, sometimes must give the government to have the authority and the responsibility to do what they think is right. And now the government, when the government finally got to its senses and understands that you need to fight terror and you need to eliminate Hamas and you need to go to a full-scale war in Gaza, now the court does not accept the views of the government. Now he's trying to micromanage the war. Now is blocking our troops from achieving the so much needed victory. And that's unforgivable. So all the issues about the courts were put aside in the beginning of the war. We decided not to push forward judicial reform, and we actually, as the political powers in Israel, even to not react when the court canceled the amendment to the basic law of judiciary. We said, okay, we'll deal with it after the war. When they took so much power in many other issues, we said, we'll wait until after the war. We don't want to have a fight on issues that are not directly connected to the war. We cannot do it anymore. Because the war will not be won if the judicial power to interfere in the war will not be stopped. The war will not be able, Israel will not be able to achieve, and just recently, just last week, it was published that the order to the IDF is that if they see the people who kidnapped the Bivas family, and they don't hold the membership card of Hamas or Jihad Islami, you cannot kill them because they're not members. I don't even understand how this reasoning goes. That's not law. That's a mockery of law. That's a mockery of justice.
What is their interest of doing so?
I don't know. I have to tell you, I don't know. I think they got used to the fact that they need to make excuses for the IDF in ICC and ICJ. They are creatures of habit that are not longer relevant. Those habits had died on October 7th and should have died way before, but those habits really shouldn't be relevant anymore. And I want to finish with this. A court system and the justice system, even if you include prosecution and you include other branches of the justice system, in the Attorney General office, the Chief Legal Advisor, are like an immune system to a body, to a person. They're supposed to be our immune system to help us from threats from the outside, to help us on threats from the inside, with cancer, with other things that attacking our body. Israeli immune system has been failing for many, many years when fighting terror. We need to teach our immune system how to work. And we need to know when the immune system have an allergic reaction that creates to identify false threats as real threats, and when they suffer from what you only can call the HIV not working, attacking the body by itself. We cannot have this kind of justice system in a wartime limiting our troops, and we must make sure that we win this war with justice, with real justice, and not with the justice that's being imported to us from the ICC and the ICJ that really don't know what justice is. Thank you very much.
We have a special guest here this evening, Michael Rappaport, and he was talking to me before and asked me unbelievable questions. And one of the questions he asked me is, Avi, can you explain to me the ultra-Orthodox draft bill? And I explained to him, and I'm not going to go the whole thing here, obviously, but I said, one thing, it's really a political hot potato issue. It's not about justice. And we have a former, I think you tell me who it was, a former Supreme Court justice or someone in the Supreme Court who just a few weeks ago said, when asked about the Arab draft issue, said, no. The Arab draft issue, that's a social issue. The ultra-Orthodox draft issue is a legal issue. Now, I'm no legal person, but to my mind, either they're both a legal issue or they're both a social issue, which basically highlights the problems also they're referring to.
And I think it's always a social problem. I think the court had done nothing to solve it. And actually, there was a former Supreme Court justice who had the solution. It's called Chok Tal. It was acted in 2002, 2003. And the fact that it was canceled by the court did not bring any ultra-Orthodox soldier to the army, but created the social problem that we still face today.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Simcha Rothman. Now I want to introduce Mr. Ken Abramowitz. Ken is one of the few people who has a comprehensive understanding of the challenges in the world, not just to Israel, but to the whole freedom-loving world. As Ken explained quite eloquently in my last interview with him just a little bit ago, while the dictatorships and the undemocratic countries in the world have well laid out strategies to destroy the democratic countries, the democratic countries, where we are from, have no strategy to defeat them. because our politicians are focused on getting reelected every few years, and they don't have the luxury to think about how to really take care of the real enemies in the world. Ken is a managing partner and co-founder of NGN Capital. He is also the founder of SaveTheWest.com, a website dedicated to saving Western civilization from itself. Also the chairman of Citizens for National Security, a Florida-based and grassroots national security advocacy organization. For this purpose, he gives 100 speeches per year just over the past 5 years. And now Ken will share with us his thoughts on the proper Israel-first understanding we need to achieve proper sovereignty for Israel. Ken Abramowitz.
Well, thank you very much, Avi. It's an honor and privilege to be here with you today. We're going to have a lot of fun for about 10 minutes. I'm going to give two 5-minute presentations. One on everything that's wrong in the world and how to fix it. And the second is relative to Israel, how to move Israel to a Israel-first long-term strategy instead of an Israel-first short-term strategy. President Trump in America often talks about America first, but he's never defined America first. So I'm working on two things at the same time, how to define America first long-term and how to define Israel first long-term. Because politicians naturally gravitate to America first short-term or Israel first short-term. But we as parents, grandparents, hopefully great-grandparents, great-great-grandparents, we have to think long-term because we're thinking through the generations. Our political leaders are thinking through the evening or till the next election, and so I'll try to distinguish the two. So first, does everyone have a handout with a pie chart with yellow pie in the middle? We have some extra copies, so if someone, well, you can share them, but if someone does not have one, just raise your hand, and one of my friends will give you one. Okay, so I'm going to spend 5 minutes on each slide here. Now, everyone here is color-coded yellow for the sunlight of Western civilization, the rule of law, Torah, basic law. In America, we call it Constitution and Bill of Rights. You are what I call normal. Congratulations for being here with us. Now, I have another definition of normal, and that is anybody who agrees with me. So hopefully you're normal twice instead of just once. Now, good people can also be color-coded white for the surrender flag. They're wonderful people. They believe in the rule of law. They just do not want to fight for anything. If you look at the recent parasha of the 12 spies, the 2 spies, the ones we remember, Caleb and Joshua, are yellow, and the other 10 that we've forgotten about are white. So this challenge has been going on since biblical times. It's nothing new. Now, the bad guys are the reds, the greens, and the blues. The reds are traditional color for communists. Green, traditional color for Islam, but I'm not talking about Islam, I'm talking about Islamists. That's countries who want to impose Islam on somebody else, and that would be Iran and Qatar and Turkey financing the Muslim Brotherhood. The reds would be China, Russia, North Korea, Cuba, Venezuela, among others. And the blues, color-coded blue for the United Nations color, are the globalists. And that would include the World Economic Forum, the drug cartels, and social media companies. Now, these 3 groups, color-coded groups of people, have declared war on the yellows and the whites. So I call it World War III. Basically, every country is fighting every country everywhere. Or to quote a Beatles song, the war is here, there, and everywhere. Whereas in World War I and World War II, the war was over there, in Europe or the Far East. Now, the question is, when did World War III begin? You could say, there's many years that it began. You could say it began October 7th in Israel. But if Israel's America's #1 ally, you could say it began in America too, and in Europe on October 7th. If you go further back into the past, the Red War began in 1917 when Lenin and his communist criminals illegally took over Russia. The Green War began in about the year 630 when Muhammad and his Islamist criminals illegally left Saudi Arabia, what we call Saudi Arabia now, and invaded half of the Christian world and took it over, which no one remembers because it was so long ago. The Blue War began in 1923 with the League of Nations, which then became the United Nations and World Economic Forum. If you want to go further back into past, into biblical times, the Reds, the Greens, and the Blues are the Amalekites. Nothing's changed in 3,400 years other than the names and the color code. And as, I want to give you 10 characteristics of the Reds, the Greens, and the Blues so you can remember them as you follow them over time. Number one, they're all dictatorships. Number two, they're all unelected. Number three, they hate Torah. They hate the 10 Commandments. They hate all the 613 commandments. They hate the rule of law. Using an American term, in contrast to normal people who believe in life, liberty, and pursuit of happiness for 100% of the people, they believe in life, liberty, and pursuit of happiness for 10% of the people. Me, my family, and friends, but not everybody else. Number six, they hate democracy. Number seven, they hate God. Number eight, they hate freedom of speech. Number nine, they're all criminals. And number 10, my favorite word to describe the Reds, the Greens, and the Blues, they're modern-day pagans. We thought we defeated the pagans, but the pagans are back, and they're the Reds, Greens, and Blues. And they've declared war on God, which we represent, and I'm betting on God, by the way. Okay, let's flip it over. Let me just spend 5 minutes on Israel. And by the way, much of this information is on my website, savethewest.com. Everyone should sign up. I write an article every 2 weeks, and if you sign up, you get the article. It's a public service. So now I'm going to go through the 10 challenges that Israel has, and I'm going to look at them from the short-term point of view and long-term point of view. Obviously, I favor the long-term point of view. Number one, we have Iran out of control for the past 45 years. Death to Israel, death to America. They promised to kill everyone in Israel, 80% Jewish, and everyone in America, 90% Christian. And for 45 years, no one did anything. America didn't do anything. Israel didn't do it. Well, Israel did things quietly, but didn't quite solve the problem. And Europe did nothing. And here we are now. Iran has 500,000 worldwide terrorists, the largest terror organization ever created in the history of the world. Obviously, the 500,000 terrorists have to be destroyed, and Israel's doing a good job in Gaza with 40,000. America should be taking care of the 50,000 in Yemen, and then America and Israel should be taking care of the 75,000 or so in Lebanon. It's a huge task. Number two, Palestinian Authority was the fruits of Oslo, which was a good example of Israel first short term. And Israel never forced them to reform their schools and media. It was in the Oslo Accords, but Israel never forced them to change their false narrative. Number three, cyber. Here Israel does a good job, but Israel and the other Western countries have to prepare the country both defensively and offensively to protect itself from the bad guys and ultimately destroy the bad guys through cyber. It's preferable to blowing things up. Number four, Iran is surrounding Israel also through Sinai, and also endangering Jordan. They want to take over Jordan and then get a common border with Israel. Israel obviously must protect Jordan. Number five, the Supreme Court overreach. Some people tell me this should be number one, and some people tell me it should be number 10. In reality, it should be number one, but I compromised with my friends and I made it number 5. The Supreme Court has basically been running the country for the past 25 years when it took over the country with an illegal coup in the mid-1990s. They did it slowly, so nobody ever thinks that the country is a dictatorship run by an unelected Supreme Court. And it makes it very difficult. It makes it very difficult, as Simca just said, to properly run the country when you have a bunch of unelected lawyers running the country. And I put the number one responsibility for October 7th was on the shoulders of the Supreme Court. They should all resign. And all their illegally appointed attorney generals should also resign. Number 6, Iran has surrounded Israel with Hamas, aided also by their friends in Qatar, and in Gaza, and the Houthis in Yemen. All of these weapons that have been provided by Iran should have been blown up long ago. But Israel's now paying for 57 years of Israel first short-term policies as it moves to Israel first long-term policies. Number 7, the Bedouins are taking over the Negev. For all these years, Israel's never come up with a solution for the Bedouins. I have a simple solution. There's a whole variety of bases that Israel has, the IDF has in the Negev. All of the perimeters of those bases should be doubled or tripled, depending on their size, so that they protect themselves from the encroachment by the Bedouins. Also, the Bedouins, Israel, there's only one rule of law in this country. Israel cannot allow Bedouins to have several wives and produce babies paid for by the government. Makes no sense. Also, Israel has to aggregate the Bedouins, educate the Bedouins, make sure there's work for the Bedouins, and Israel has a lot of work to do here, but right now has no short-term or long-term strategy. Number 8, Israel has to protect its offshore gas fields, obviously, which requires a bigger navy to patrol and protect. Number 9, the UN, EU, International Criminal Court, and others, NGOs I call cultural terror organizations. Remember, we're fighting a physical war and a cultural war. Israel's very deficient, as are all democracies, by the way, in fighting a cultural war. And, for example, UNRWA should have been, as a terror organization, should have been closed long ago. And Israel has still not taken over the educational system in Jerusalem on behalf of the Arabs. They should all be under the Arab curriculum, not under the Palestinian Authority or Hamas curriculum. And finally, Hezbollah has been allowed to grow in Lebanon, and as with Gaza, it never should have been allowed. All the shipments should have been blown up 5, 10, 15, 20 years ago, and Israel now has to correct that. So let me just conclude in 30 seconds. As Avi alluded to in his talk, Israel, like all democracies, plays defense 100% of the time, and the bad guys play offense 100% of the time. That's no way to win a football game or a basketball game. And Israel and every democracy has to move to 50% offense, 50% defense, just like a normal basketball team or football team. And finally, the war that Israel's fighting is the same war that America's fighting and Europe's fighting, that all democracies are fighting, India's fighting, and it's the war of Hashem versus the pagans. This war is from biblical times. We still live in biblical times, even though we don't know that. And as I said before, in a battle between Hashem and the pagans, I'm betting on Hashem. Thank you for your time.
I couldn't agree more with Ken's final comment. Never bet against God. Never. Thank you, Ken. Now, while Israel needs to develop as a proper sovereign country, unbeholden to even our best allies, we will always need good allies. With that, I want to share a recent conversation I had with one of the best friends we have in Washington, D.C. today, Speaker of the House, Mike Johnson.
Shalom, shalom, everybody. Welcome back. This is an episode of The Pulse of Israel and a special project together with the Yes Israel Project, sitting with one of very, very close friends of the Jewish people and the state of Israel here in Congress in Washington. Shalom, shalom, everybody. Welcome back. This is an episode of The Pulse of Israel and a special project together with the Yes Israel Project, sitting with Shalom, shalom, everybody. Welcome back. This is an episode of The Pulse of Israel and a special project together with the Yes Israel Project, sitting with one of very, very close friends of the Jewish people and the state of Israel here in Congress in Washington, D.C., Congressman Mike Johnson. Shalom, Mike.
Great to see you.
It is a pleasure seeing you.
Always great to have you on Capitol Hill, and apologize for the Spartan accommodations here. We've just stepped out of a House Judiciary Committee hearing so that I could visit with you, so I didn't want to miss the opportunity.
Do you want to know something? It's something special being in these special judiciary offices right now, because we in Israel are dealing with our own judicial reform,
Yes.
which is so necessary to strengthen our democracy and allow the proud Jewish conservative right to rule properly. So being here brings me close to home and gives me the inkling, wait, maybe I could do it by being in the judicial offices of Congress, but no, it doesn't work that way.
It was just ironic, the timing. We didn't plan that.
Exactly. So you've come to Israel with us before.
Yes.
And please God, there are going to be more trips for congressmen and senators in order to continue working on strengthening the U.S.-Israel strategic relationship to really help all of humanity in the freedom-loving world. What can you say to other potential congressmen and senators and everyone on the importance of joining one of these trips with Ruthie and Sarah?
Well, it's a life-changing trip. That was our second trip to Israel, and the last time I was there happened to fall right before the COVID pandemic hit. It was in February of 2020.
Right.
It was the last trip that we took for a couple of years. It just worked out that way. But Jim Jordan and I were on that trip, and among others, and we had just an extraordinary experience. Got to meet with Prime Minister Netanyahu at the residence, which was a real treat, just a small group of us. And then to see all different aspects of what's happening in the culture and society there that we, in members of Congress, would never have an opportunity to understand by just reading about it. You have to go and be there in person and to see it, to really have your eyes opened as to what the reality is of all these situations. So just an invaluable resource for a lawmaker in the United States to be able to see that firsthand and come back with that knowledge and information and then share it with our colleagues, because this is critically important what's happening in Israel, obviously.
Right. And also, I just want to say thank you, because just a topic that has come up here in Washington is about stopping funding to UNRWA, because it's funding the education, an international body, United Nations body, funding the education of hatred to Jews under Hamas and in Gaza and Judea and Samaria, and you're a co-signer of a co-sponsorship of that bill. Anything you can add about the importance of why this is coming up now in Washington and putting your name behind that?
Well, it's a priority for us. I think leaders in the United States Congress have to speak with clarity and conviction about our opposition to anti-Semitism, wherever that shows up, and we've seen a rise of some of that tragically in the United States, as you know. But to know that a cent of taxpayer dollars at the U.S. would go to support the publication of materials that are anti-Semitic is just something that we have to stop. And the resolution and any legislation that we can do in that regard is really, really important. We've seen those materials. We know that that is happening. And for anyone to deny it is just a denial of the facts.
Pulse of Israel, frontline videos from the Holy Land. Support our work by donating today.
It's important to understand that I'm able to have this relationship with the Speaker of the House thanks to a very important project that many of you might have heard of for the first time here, that I'm involved in together with Ruthie Lieberman and Sarah Pillay and the Yes Israel Project. And just so you understand the importance of this relationship and this project, Speaker Johnson's first speech as Speaker included information that Ruthie and Sarah provided him. His first act as Speaker was using material provided by them, and just this week, they helped write his appeal to the President. So this is one of those projects that has real results for strengthening the Israel-U.S. relationship and helping us. And I don't think it's a problem for me to say it's a project that is always looking for supporters, and this is definitely one of them that should get that support. Thankfully, we have friends like Speaker of the House Mike Johnson, but U.S. foreign policy for decades has treated Israel more like a vassal state than a true ally, with only one recent president pushing against the accepted foreign policy establishment direction. I'm a big fan of reminding people of the quote from former Secretary of State Alexander Haig, and I quote, "Israel is the largest American aircraft carrier in the world that cannot be sunk, does not carry even one American soldier, and is located in a critical region for American national security." We need the Israeli leaders to be reminding the American leaders that we're really talking about a strong alliance and not one when we allow ourselves to be treated like a vassal state. And I could not ask for a better speaker to share with us her thoughts on a vision for a positive diplomatic future for Israel, especially with the United States, than Caroline Glick. And as I turn the microphone over to her, just to emphasize the situation we're in, because not everyone understands, today we have an administration that is steps away from potentially making it illegal for IDF soldiers who are serving in Gaza to potentially travel to Western countries, and is focused on punishing Jewish farmers in Judea and Samaria for using self-defense, rather than supporting Israel to the existence of the Iranian-Qatari financed terror in Gaza, Lebanon, and in Judea and Samaria. Yet instead, the administration focuses on withholding weapons from Israel and forces Israel to give money to a terror organization called the Palestinian Authority that pays terrorists and educates its children to murder Jews. This is a reality that must change. Caroline, help us get there. Give us the vision.
Friendly crowd, thanks. I want to thank Avi Abelo for everything that he does for Israel and for organizing this fantastic conference, now for the second time. And I want to thank all of you for coming here, and Rachel Moore for doing all the logistics and herding cats, and particularly me. I'm a mangy cat, so I appreciate that very much. And of course to Michael Rappaport, who I feel I can call a friend, which is a real privilege. And now to the issue at heart, which is Israel's diplomatic horizon. So first, I think that you can't really talk about where we have to go until we sort of get a lay of the land of where we are and what we've learned since October 7th. So we've learned that the Red-Green alliance between Islamists and cultural Marxists, progressives, is strong. It's very, very strong. And it's the ascendant force in the West. And this is something that people hadn't really been aware of, at least not the level that people have become aware of since October 7th, that this very powerful alliance that first emerged at the end of the Cold War, more or less, is now swallowing up major political parties in the United States, the Democrats in Britain, the Labour Party in France, the Left Party, many of the left parties in Germany, the Green Party in Canada, the Green Party, and in lots and lots of countries, you see parties that were considered to be maybe, not hostile, not hateful, are becoming more and more hateful towards Jews, towards the Jewish state. And that's very clear now in a way that it wasn't clear for most people before October 7th. The strategic use of anti-Semitism as a political tool, as a tool for political mobilizing in the West is something that hadn't been done in such an overt way really since the Nazis, is the way that it's now being openly used as a means for mobilizing political support in the West. That's something also that's very different that we've noticed. And we've seen as well, and again, I think we've been commenting about it, me and Avi and many other people in this room, for many years, but really what we started seeing with Obama very clearly, and then Trump, and now Biden, is that the United States no longer has a clear foreign policy. It basically has two totally different foreign policies depending on who's in the White House. If it's a Democratic administration, it is not pro-Israel, it is not particularly supportive of Israel, and today we're facing the most hostile administration we've ever faced with the Biden administration. And on the other hand, Republican administrations and the Republican Party, in general, becomes more and more friendly to Israel each year and each administration. And so we have one policy when it's Obama-Biden in power. We have a totally different policy when it's Donald Trump in power. And that's something that really became apparent for the first time with the Obama presidency. And it's only gotten worse, and the split between the two parties and their foreign policy, and particularly their Middle East policy and their Israel policy, the distinction only grows and becomes more extreme. And that's what we're facing. So you can't have any long-term planning with your relationship with the United States because you don't know who's going to be in the White House tomorrow. And with that situation, the whole nature of our alliance with the United States shifts. In Europe, you're seeing convulsions. I read a headline yesterday that said that depending on the outcome of the elections in France for the parliament, they may start a civil war between the Red-Green Alliance and the nationalists under Le Pen soon. So we're facing convulsions in European countries with the Red-Green Alliance ascendant and many nationalist or sometimes nativist elements inside of these societies are beginning to respond more and more violently as they see the threats against their way of life becoming more acute, so that you're seeing a give and take and a pull and a push in Europe that's making the continent, and particularly Western Europe, much more incendiary, much more dangerous. And finally, we have the emergence now that we've seen, particularly since October 7th, of international organizations as their own sort of cosmos of international affairs, whether it's the International Criminal Court or the International Court of Justice or the United Nations and its related bodies. What we're seeing here is the rise of unelected, undemocratic institutions that are entirely hostile to Israel. It's just like there's nobody to talk to in the ICC. There's nobody to talk to in the ICJ. There's no way of reforming the UN if you're Israel. And if you're a veto-wielding permanent member of the UN Security Council, you can do many things. If you are the United States and you fund 22% of the UN's operating budget, you can do certain things, but Israel cannot do anything. And what we are facing is an international system of organizations and institutions that is becoming more powerful and is completely hostile to the existence of a Jewish state. So what do we have when we're facing this system, whether it's the system of the, and one last aspect of the West, actually, before I go into what we do from here. So the other thing that has become very clear when you see the eruption of this volcano of anti-Semitism in the West, and the way that it's animating politics in the West, you realize that this really isn't the Arab-Israeli conflict anymore, that actually the hostility of members of the Red-Green Alliance in the West towards Israel is much harsher than the hostility of the likes of the UAE or the Saudis or many of the other moderate Arab states. At the same time, we have to remember that none of these nations in our region are pro-Israel in the sense that they are sympathetically inclined towards Jewish people or to Jewish nationalism. And they, if anything, they're not leading the fight against Israel, but they're waiting to see how it sort of pans out before they figure out where they stand on Israel. So that you see an increasingly hostile Egypt under the Assisi regime, and we had been friendly with them. We had had close relations with Assisi since he ousted the Muslim Brotherhood from power in 2013. And here we're seeing that actually his regime enabled Hamas to build the machine of murder that invaded us on October 7th. So these are this is new information that we've gotten since October 7th, but we also see that whether it's the UAE or Bahrain or any other Abraham Accords country, that they're not leading the charge against Israel, but they're also not particularly friendly, and that we have to win this war in order to secure our peace, because they're assessing things in terms of their interests. And if Israel doesn't deliver the goods, then what interest of theirs is served by sticking their neck out to have an alliance of any sort with the Jewish state? So the edifice of our entire peace diplomacy in the Middle East is also in danger, and the thing that's pushing the Arab nations that made peace with us to begin to consider their options is the extraordinary spasms of hatred against Israel and rejection of Zionism, rejection of Jewish nationalism, rejection of our right to exist as a state in the West. So that's a new thing as well. So how do you go about being an Israeli diplomat in this world? What do you do when you're trying to figure out, okay, so what are our moves here? How do we look at this situation? We have our men on the ground in Gaza. We have them on the border with Lebanon. We're waiting to see what happens in the war, how it pans out. And you are sitting today, in a Western country or anywhere in the world, in South America, which is also going to the, is falling apart in some places, although we have Argentina, which is amazing. And so you look, yeah, right? We love Argentina. Viva Argentina. We love Argentina today. And that's really the point. We love Argentina today because today we have the most pro-Israel government in Argentina. So you see the situation, you see where you have friends, where you have foes, and you base your bilateral relations and your strategy for contending with this very difficult geopolitical environment for Israel on working as hard as you can to deepen and expand your bilateral friendships or your bilateral relations, more to the point, with friendly governments, and you minimize your exposure to hostile ones. So that means, for instance, you look at Argentina and you think, okay, he's really far away, and he's amazing. How do we help him, and how does he help us? And then you spend a really long time putting together that kind of transactional relationship that can help both countries and help Israel as much as possible. How can Argentina bring its position to bear in the Americas, in the Organization of the Americas, in all kinds of regional groupings where they're also facing Marxist governments like Nicaragua? How do we help them help us? And so you put together ways to do that. That's something that you do. You always look for the friendlies. You also have to stop romanticizing international affairs. One of the worst weaknesses, and it's abiding, of Israeli diplomats from the establishment of the state is that we romanticize bilateral ties. So Shimon Peres, for instance, he loved France because France was Israel, and he didn't understand that when France was embracing Israel and they were our largest arms supplier in the 1950s and early 60s, it was because they thought that it served their interest when they were in a war in Algeria. And the minute that they decided to walk away from Algeria, they changed their assessment of their national interests and they abandoned Israel. And Peres, who was the personal beneficiary of France's assessment of its interests because he was the man who was negotiating with the French, thought that we had done something to get them angry at us. And he completely missed that there was nothing personal going on, that it was all business, and that the French are fantastic at couching business interests or national interests in romantic language. And so for the rest of his life, he was trying to bend to the will of the French foreign ministry, never understanding that it had nothing to do with anything that Israel did. It only had to do with the way that de Gaulle was reorganizing French foreign policy against the United States towards the Arab League after he withdrew French forces from Algeria. And that kind of blindness, that kind of mistaking the personal for the national is something that has misinformed Israeli diplomats for decades. And don't forget that Paris was considered the greatest statesman in Israeli diplomatic history until Prime Minister Netanyahu sort of outpaced him with the transfer of the U.S. Embassy to Jerusalem in 2018. So we're looking at a mindset of Israeli diplomacy that is completely misguided. And that, for instance, has informed Israel's standoffishness with nationalist leaders in Europe like Viktor Orban, who may or may not like Jews, whose party may or may not like Israel or Jews. But because of the way that they assess Hungary's national interests, they believe that it is in Hungary's best interest to protect Israel in the EU and to stand with Israel in international forum and to want to make and expand their partnerships with the Jewish state. And so we have to stop being nasty to people who support us. We have to start being supportive of them. And then we can get more out of those relationships and we can allow them to help us more. The same is obviously true with the evangelical Christian community in the United States. You know, this is the largest, most important demographic of supporters of Israel in the United States. They are the reason, more than anything else, that the United States is a pro-Israel country. And when Yair Lapid came into the foreign ministry as foreign minister in 2021, his first statement was that they were going to reorganize our priorities and that they were no longer going to be prioritizing Israel's ties with the evangelical community in the United States, that he wanted to prioritize mending our relations with Reform and conservative Jews. And again, why? You know, I mean, it's because he viewed foreign policy as advancing his own social interests. He thinks that the people who are most important are the people he likes the most. But the people who are most important to Israel, particularly in this environment, but really at all times, just as is the case with every other country on the face of the earth, the people who are most important to any country are the people who want to be in partnership with that country. And if that's the case with France, and if that's the case with Hungary, and if that's the case with Chile, it's the case with Israel as well. And we have to be willing to take a whole of society approach when we approach countries, so that if you have, you know, the reason why Chile has become so anti-Israel is because they have a massive Palestinian Arab community in Chile that has turned Chile into something resembling the Red-Green alliance in Chile, and that's why they become, and so we have to be able to look at these things and recognize them for what they are, and we have to understand that, you know, foreign policy is about going, just as, you know, military policy is about going into the battlefield of war in order to defeat your enemies and push forward and advance your national interest, your national security in war. Foreign policy is about using the international arena to advance your national interests as much as possible, both strategically and diplomatically, politically, and it's not about making friends. It's not about getting invited anywhere. It's about seeing a situation, scanning your environment, understanding who it is that you're facing, understanding where your friends are, and understanding who is your foe and who you cannot convince, and then spending the vast majority of your time empowering your friends, because then more people will want to be your friends, and castigating your enemies, and doing it very convincingly, because then people won't want to be your enemies. So these are very important basic rules of diplomacy that are always correct, But in a time like today, when you see the groundswell of hatred gathering and just exploding everywhere against Israel, we have to recognize that people want to stand with winners. They want to stand with the people who face them with determination and a sense of conviction in the justice of who they are, and of making it clear that it's in their interest to stand with us. So all of these things are how Israel moves forward, even in these dire straits that we're faced with. And we can do it. It's just a question of having the right understanding of the world that we live in, its complexities, its threats, and its opportunities. So those are my thoughts for today, and I appreciate very much the opportunity to address you. Thank you.
Caroline, it is always a pleasure hearing you, especially at a Pulse of Israel conference. Thank you so much. Following Caroline's very, very important words, we now have a message from a friend and another Israel Knesset member, Dan Iluz.
Hello everyone, and thank you for your strong support for Israel. I'm sorry I couldn't be here with you today, but I did want to give you this message. Israel is right now on a 7-front war. It's an existential war with incredible importance for the state of Israel. On October 7th, we were attacked brutally. And on that day, after we saw the face of evil, we understood that we had to go into this existential war and defeat Hamas, destroy Hamas, in order to give a clear message to the world that people who do the atrocities that happened on October 7th cannot continue existing afterwards. And therefore, we went into this war in order to eradicate Hamas, this terrorist group, from the face of this earth. We are still in this war, a very difficult war, and our soldiers are fighting not only for us in Israel, but for the whole of the free world. Now, when we look at the future, when we look at the outlook in the future, we see two possible options. On the one hand, we have an option of Israel defeating Hamas, winning, bringing complete victory, and then developing, continuing to be a strong country without all of its enemies around, because it's enemies that we will have defeated. It's an outlook which we can imagine with more diplomatic agreements, with the Abraham Accords expanding, with normalization with the Saudis, with Israel, which was considered an island country, not because it's an actual island, but because it's surrounded by enemies. And so on an economic level, it was like an island country, becoming the center of the world, of world trade, with trade paths from Saudis, from India, going through Saudi Arabia, going through the Middle East, coming to Israel, and then going to Europe, to North America. This is an incredible future with a strong diplomatic Israel, where the whole world will want connections and relations with Israel. There's another option. The option is not winning the war, stopping the war before we win it, not defeating the other enemies that are looking to destroy us. If we stop the war, if we cave in to diplomatic pressure now, in order to be nice to our friends, to be nice to other countries, this won't strengthen us diplomatically. This will only weaken us diplomatically. Because instead of this bright future that I described, we will have a future with more terrorism, with emboldened terrorists against Israel on all of our borders. And that will weaken Israel. And who wants to be friends with a weak country? No one. Those are the two paths that we have. If we want a strong diplomatic future for Israel, the way to do it is through victory. Victory in Gaza, victory on our northern border, and yes, also victory against Iran. Once we bring victory, then Israel will be stronger and our future will look brighter, also on a diplomatic level. Thank you.
Chaver Knesset Dan Iluz was actually supposed to be here this evening. He and his wife just recently had a son, just a week ago, and last minute he unfortunately had to cancel, but because he really wanted to be a part of it, he sent us this video in order to still take part in our conference. So thank you, Dan Iluz. Before we move over to Iran, a very, very important conversation we're about to have, I just want to bring up 3 examples of Israel diplomacy in our short 76 years, which are very important for us to remember and for our leaders to remember. Before David Ben-Gurion announced the establishment of the State of Israel, he sent Moshe Sharet to U.S. President Truman in his administration to receive U.S. approval. I don't know how many people remember this, but the Truman administration warned against Israel announcing the establishment of the Jewish state, and they specifically said that if we had the gall to announce without their approval, they would not support us when the Arab armies would lead to attack us. We announced it, Arabs attacked, America didn't come in to help. We did it anyway. Next story, we have U.S. President Reagan warning Prime Minister Menachem Begin not to attack the Iraqi nuclear reactor. We all know what happened. Menachem Begin attacked the nuclear reactor. President Reagan and his administration punished Israel severely in terms of information, in terms of intelligence, in all sorts of ways. And a few months later, it was the Reagan administration that admitted that we were right in attacking the Iraqi nuclear reactor. And then finally, the third one from the other side, and I think Bruce Brill is in here, and Bruce, I interviewed him, and anyone who does not know his story should buy his book and read his book. This has to do with the Yom Kippur War of 1973. Israeli Prime Minister Golda Meir gave in to the threats of the Nixon-Kissinger administration, who basically threatened not to do 2 things. We shouldn't call up IDF reserves fully. This is hours before the attack. And that we couldn't have a preemptive attack against our enemies. And we all know the price, the steep price Israel paid by appeasing and giving in to the American demands and not standing up for what we really need to do in that diplomatic situation. And now I'd like to invite up Alex Trayman of JNS, friend and editor of a very, very, very important publication that everyone should be a subscriber to if you're not yet. Alex. And Len Karakovsky. No one is better placed to share with us a message about how Israel has to move forward with Iran than Len, former Deputy Assistant Secretary of State for Digital Strategy, Senior Advisor to the U.S. Special Representative for Iran, and Chief Marketing Officer of America's Economic Diplomacy, with the Jerusalem Post calling him the State Department's secret weapon. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Avi. Incredible conference so far. Thank you to Rachel Moore for all the coordination, and thank you all for being here. It's an important time in the history of the modern Jewish state, the State of Israel, and it's a privilege, Len, to be here with you, here in the Begin Center with so many people that care so deeply about the Jewish state. For those that don't know Len Karakovsky was called by the Jerusalem Post the State Department's secret weapon. You were in the State Department, you were a senior advisor to the Undersecretary for Economic Growth, Energy, and the Environment, a senior advisor for Global Public Affairs, a Deputy Assistant Secretary of State for Digital Strategy. A lot of these jobs also had marketing and creative attached to them. So we'll take that with a grain of salt here, we'll see. But we're here to talk about what I think everybody understands is the principal threat to the State of Israel, and one of the principal threats to the entire free world at this time, which is the Islamic Republic of Iran. I think that in part this conflict that we're in with Gaza has been falsely categorized as just the latest round of an intractable Israeli-Palestinian conflict, when everyone can see that Hamas, Hezbollah, the Houthis, all of whom have attacked Israel, are all terror proxies of Iran. And it was only 2 months ago here in Jerusalem where we witnessed the downing of ballistic missiles, which were part of a major barrage of ballistic cruise missiles and drones that were sent to Israel. And this is like broke all potential red lines, a direct attack with ballistic missiles from Iran. Some of these things were 20 yards long. What should we in Israel make of this attack? And what do we make also of Israel's response?
Well, thank you for having me. And yes, I think before we get into Iran, as someone who's coming in from the United States, I want to make sure that I acknowledge the deep trauma that happened here on October 7th, and I think it's important for all of us to look at the world before October 7th and after October 7th, and Iran is no different. So when you said Iran is the foremost threat to Israel, I would say Iran is probably the foremost external threat to Israel. I think Israel is the foremost internal threat to Israel. I think there's a lot of work that needs to be done here internally to make sure that the state of Israel is strong enough internally and united. The people of Israel cannot afford to have a house divided. The world is not a friend of Israel, as you've noticed. Even though the American people still support Israel, about 80% to 20% or so, I think everybody here and everybody in the free world is on notice that lurking beneath or now on the surface is a true threat, not just to Israel, but to the free world. And Caroline mentioned the Red-Green Alliance, and that's absolutely true. That's been happening since the Cold War, since Arafat was created by the Soviets, and the whole idea of a Palestinian state was conjured up by the KGB and the Soviet apparatus. So that is still together, and it's still alive and kicking. It's well-funded, and the Israeli people and the Israeli decision makers need to understand the four-dimensional environment in which you're playing. Now, about Iran, look, I think Iran firing on Israel from its own territory is indeed crossing a red line. I think the calculations with which Israel has approached the whole Iran issue, which is to manage it, just like Israel tried to manage Hamas and manage Hezbollah, without truly having an end game in mind, but let's just kick the can down the road and, live another day and we'll figure it out. I think that has to change, because you've put the pieces together quite accurately. Hamas is not just Hamas, Hamas is Iran. Hezbollah is not just Hezbollah or even Lebanon, it's Iran. The Houthis wouldn't exist without Iran. Iran is the biggest sponsor of terrorism, not just in this region, not just against Israel, but, as you know, they call Israel the little Satan, and they call the United States the great Satan. So the United States would be wise to have a different outlook on Iran as well. So the stakes are clearer than they've ever been, and I think both Israel, the United States, and indeed the free world, all of our friends and allies, need to recalibrate how we approach Iran going forward. I think there needs to be a serious option on the table by decision makers of regime change. There, I said it. It's you know what? You're not allowed to say these things, but the only way Israel will ever live in peace, and the only way the United States is going to be able to rely on a stable Middle East is with a different government in Iran.
Until now, and you just alluded to it, Israel has really been, quote-unquote, managing the conflict, right? We've seen Stuxnet virus, assassinations, strikes here and there, certainly striking against the movements of weapons through Syria and elsewhere. And Prime Minister Netanyahu has been talking about the Iranian threat for a long time. He even went into Congress in 2015 to oppose the Iran nuclear deal. But ultimately, and then he went to the UN, right, and he showed the bomb and he said, this is the red line, and Iran's right here, and that was many years ago. And they just continue to develop and advance their nuclear program. So Israel really hasn't prevented Iran from crossing that nuclear threshold. We've been managing the conflict. And as you said, there's before October 7th, there's after October 7th. You did mention regime change. I don't know to what extent Israel can affect regime change. Maybe there are things that they can do to aid in the process toward regime change. But what are Israel's policy options here now after October 7th in terms of A, managing the conflict, or B, figuring out a way to solve this thing once and for all?
As always, Israel finds itself in the most perplexing situation that would make King Solomon jealous, Look, I think you have to be realistic. There's been a traumatic event here. Israel, the Israeli government put out 3 objectives in terms of what it wants to accomplish with its operations in Gaza. Get the hostages back, make sure Hamas is no longer able to conduct an attack like October 7th, and then figure out some way to manage Gaza going forward so that it can no longer present a threat going forward. So those are 3 practical considerations, and I still think that those have to be the foremost priority for the Israeli government. And you got to solve the crisis right in front of you, triage it, and then we'll deal with the next step. Now, Hezbollah has made that more complicated in recent days. Certainly, Houthis firing on Israel directly is unprecedented. Iran firing on Israel from its territory is unprecedented. So I think you need to have those things in the back of your mind. But Israel has 3 options really. Go back to the way Israel managed Iran before October 7th, which is to manage it, have sporadic activity against Iran, send messages, delay the doomsday scenario as much as possible, deal with its proxies in a way that keeps them at bay. So pre-October 7 mindset, I don't think that's an option, frankly. The other extreme is to go directly after Iran. When Iran fired on Israel, I think that was a seminal moment for Israel, and if that weren't the opportunity to go directly after Iran, then I think at the very least that opened the door to that kind of a consideration being on the table somewhere down the road, because as I said, there's no way Israel is going to have peace unless the Iranian regime is history. Now, the in-between option there is to go harder against Iranian proxies and completely make them irrelevant as much as possible so that Iran cannot fight through its proxies against Israel. So if Hamas is gone to some extent, if Hezbollah is gone to some extent, if the United States does again what it did under the Trump administration and squeezes Iran economically and diplomatically and makes it very difficult for the Iranian regime to support its proxies, I think that will create much more space for Israel to have a long-term peaceful scenario that could be planned out. But in the end, it is not a call of the United States government, it's the call of the Israeli government. If the Israeli decision makers decide that they no longer want to put up with the kind of scenarios that you're putting up with today, but not just today, for the last, 15, 20 years since Hamas has been in power, Israel has played the game of entertaining incoming rockets every so often and treating that as a, fleeting problem. So if that approach changes and the Israeli government decides that they're no longer willing to do that going forward and solve the problem once and for all, well, then that's a test for the Israeli decision makers and the Israeli people. Because my question to all of you and everybody who lives in Israel is, do the Israeli people want to solve this problem once and for all, or do the Israeli people want to manage this problem? And how do you want to manage it, and who are you going to elect to deal with that issue?
Certainly, when we talk about the terror proxies and this last strategy that you're laying out, Hamas, the much smaller of the terror proxies, for all the damage that Hamas has done to Israel, the worst pogrom in the history of the modern Jewish state, Hezbollah poses a much graver threat to the home front. They have a much larger army, so the threat of a October 7th cross-border attack looms large. Also, we know that Hezbollah poses a threat of as many as 150 to 200,000 weapons, many of them much more sophisticated than Hamas's Qassam rockets. Some of them are precision guided, can deliver much more serious payloads, and even overrun any Israeli missile defense systems Currently, you have over 80,000 residents in Israel in the north that have been evacuated from their homes. Hezbollah has pummeled Israel with as many as 19 or 20,000 attacks, Katyusha rockets, anti-tank guided missiles. Towns like Metula have been devastated. And there's a lot of talk that as soon as Gaza, or this, what they call phase 2 of the war with Hamas, wraps up in the coming weeks and the transfer into phase 3, that Israel is prepared or is preparing for a much larger offensive against Hezbollah. But at the same time, a feeling among many Israelis that it's a war we don't want to fight. So tell me, from your viewpoint, what do you think it could happen here? Can Israel and Hezbollah figure out a way to dampen the flames on this conflict without a wider escalation, or is a wider escalation inevitable?
I don't think the wider escalation is inevitable, and I don't think Hezbollah really wants a fight. Now, unfortunately, they've started a fight, and Israel has to defend itself. So, again, that is a decision for the Israeli government as to how to send a message to not just Hezbollah, but to Iran. And, make no mistake, what Hezbollah does and what Hamas does and what the Houthis do goes back to Ayatollah Khamenei and Tehran. So the message you're sending is not to Nasrallah. The message you're sending is to Iran. And I think while it's, yes, they are a much more dangerous threat because of the math, because of the caliber of weapons they have, and by the professionalism of their fighters versus Hamas, for example. I do not think that they want to enter into a full-scale war, but that decision also is not theirs. That decision is the Ayatollah's. So the scenario, I think Israel should be very calculating about what it does in the north border. Now, the reality of the situation where you have 80 to 100,000 people having to be exiled from their homes is not tenable. So I think we need to get to a point where they can move back, and that's a real problem, because you don't want to live with a situation where the Israeli population is now much more dense and condensed in a much tighter piece of land where some people will never go back to the south, some people will never go back to the north, and you're creating a de facto victory for Iran by making Israel smaller and smaller and a smaller target. So I think that is unacceptable too. But I think Israel does not have unlimited resources or forces or stamina to fight everybody at the same time. So I think it would be very wise to, as former President Trump said, finish Gaza as fast as possible, meet your strategic objectives in Gaza, and then I think winning in Gaza will have an impact on what Hezbollah does and what Iran does and all its proxies do, and I think that is the best thing that Israel can do to mitigate all of its threats.
The current flare-up is all taking place ostensibly before Iran becomes a deliverable nuclear power. And yet we all understand that Iran is very quickly trying to cross that threshold and become a nuclear power. Tell me, A, how Iran's crossing that threshold and becoming a nuclear power changes the strategic calculations, completely changes the game in the region, and more importantly, can anybody, Israel, the United States, anybody stop Iran from fully developing nuclear weapons?
Only Israel can have the best chance at doing that. And now, from what I understand, every single political leader here has stated that's unacceptable. And a nuclear Iran is unacceptable to Israel. As we sit here today, Iran is very close to being a nuclear state. Now, that doesn't mean that they're going to use their nuclear weapon. It doesn't mean they have a delivery mechanism that could bring a nuclear warhead here or other places. But that wasn't the calculation of Prime Minister Netanyahu or anybody else when they said Israel is not going to entertain the possibility of a nuclear Iran. I think we're pretty close to a nuclear Iran. Now, I asked someone who worked inside of the American government, I can tell you, America's not going to solve this for you. So no matter how staunch we proclaim our solidarity with the Israeli people, and the American people do feel for the Israeli people, and they want to make sure that Israel survives, not just survives, but is a strong country. The United States is not going to act first, and it's certainly not going to act first when it comes to this issue. I think Israel has to lead, and I think the decision makers have no choice but to make that decision, if they haven't made it yet, as to exactly what they're prepared to do and how close are they willing to entertain the regime coming to an actual deliverable nuclear weapon before acting. Because, you know, this is not a sure thing. You know, even though there is capability here in Israel to attack multiple facilities, we know where a lot of them are. Some of them are easier to get to than others. I know that Israel has capabilities inside of Iran to sabotage various things and make it difficult for Iran to do what it wants to do through, in its nature. But that is Israel's decision, and in a democracy, it all comes down to what do the people want, because in the end, you're going to hold your leadership accountable. And I raise the question to you is, what do you want? Are you willing, after October 7th, to entertain a nuclear Iran, or are close to a nuclear Iran? Who are you going to put in office to deal with that issue? Are you willing to live, year to year, month to month, until the news breaks that Iran is now a nuclear power? That is not for the Americans to decide or anybody else. That is for the Israeli people to decide whether pre-October 7th and post-October 7th are different, and what are you willing to create as a new reality here.
And also, of course, what consequences Israel will have to absorb, both from not taking action, also from taking action, because it's not necessarily going to be easy. When we talk about Iran, it really all goes up to the supreme leader. We had, just on Friday, elections in Iran, a first round of elections for a new president after the sudden helicopter crash of Ibrahim Raisi, who's Iran's president. But ultimately, the president is chosen by the supreme leader. Now, the supreme leader, Ali Khamenei, he's even older than Joe Biden. He's 85. And people are talking about what could be the day after. In fact, some people were saying that Raisi could have been a possible successor to Khamenei. What can Israel do? What should Israel be doing to plan for the day after Khamenei?
Well, first of all, as far as Raisi goes, the butcher of Tehran, the man with thousands of people's lives, bloody on his bloody hands, good riddance. It's not. The world is better off today. I would say, that would have been a very dangerous potential supreme leader in Iran. Not because he's more radical than the current supreme leader, but because he's dumber. He's dumber, and he does not care about the Iranians. He does not care about the Israelis or Americans, or knows the difference. I would actually compare him to Biden versus the Ayatollah to Biden, because frankly, the supreme leader, as megalomaniacal as he is, he's not dumb. He is a pragmatic extremist. Is that like a new term that we can invent?
More calculated extremist.
More calculated extremist. And to the extent that Iran hasn't crossed the threshold, to the extent Iran has not been more aggressive toward Israel, that is his call. Now, so here we are in a situation where we know he's not going to live forever, or maybe he will. I don't know, maybe he will. But he is not going to be the supreme leader for much longer. And so I think Israel has to have a twofold planning scenario. What do you do while he's in power? Because to some extent we know how he works and how he makes his decisions, and what's going to happen in the stage where there's a transition after he dies. Now that, in and of itself, while it's going to be volatile, it presents opportunities. It could potentially create another failed state in Iran, or it could present Israel and the United States and the free world with an opportunity to actually achieve that pivot to the Iran that I think could be a different kind of a player in the Middle East. Or it could get more aggressive because the IRGC, the Iranian Revolutionary Guard Corps, which has the most to lose if the wrong person becomes the supreme leader, because the Revolutionary Guard actually controls 60 to 80% of Iran's economy. And, follow the money. That's who cares about what happens next. So I see, if things are left to them, they will install somebody who's going to benefit their pocketbooks going forward, and that they feel that they can control. But that again is a third in three possibilities of phased planning that I think needs to be done. So while there is time and there are options, Israel is much closer to Iran than the United States, and it's for Israel to make sure that they take these opportunities seriously. Let me just add one more thing, because I've worked on the Iran portfolio at the State Department. I've also worked with the Iranian diaspora, and I've talked to many people inside Iran as well. And I think you have to remember that the people of Iran are different than the government of Iran. The people of Iran hate the regime. It is no coincidence that at every protest in the Western world that is pro-Israel, you're seeing Israeli flags, you're also seeing the old Iranian flag, the pre-Islamic Republic flag, right alongside the Israeli flag, standing by the Israelis, because the Jews and the Persians, or the Iranians of the past, have a long history, as many of you know, going back to Cyrus the Great. And 2,500 years ago, those of you who are scholars in the Old Testament and the Bible, remember that it's Cyrus who liberated the Jews from Babylon. It is Cyrus who allowed the Jews to come back and rebuild the temple in Jerusalem. It is Cyrus who helped finance the rebuilding of the temple in Jerusalem. The Iranian people remember that. And to them, Cyrus is just as important as Cyrus is important to the history of the Jewish people. And that is really the core of the relationship between Israel and Iran. And it won't take much for the Iranian people to take the step and reclaim their history and realign with Israel to build a much brighter future for both people.
We saw during the Obama administration that Obama specifically did not stand up and support those that came out into the streets during the Green Revolution. He supported the Iranian regime. Later in his administration, obviously, he signed the JCPOA, Iran nuclear deal, which provided a lot of funding toward the Islamic Republic. You worked in the Trump administration. Trump pulled out of the JCPOA, among other things that he did here in the Middle East. And the Biden administration tried, but failed maybe to get back into the JCPOA, even though there was sanctions relief that was provided. We're coming up now on what seems to be a very important election for the free world in general, and certainly for the United States. How important is November's election for the state of Israel, particularly vis-a-vis Iran?
Wow. Well, you've seen how the Biden administration practices its support of Israel. You've seen its policies related to the Middle East, not just toward Israel, but toward our friends in the Arab world. Unfortunately, the Biden administration pivoted 180 degrees from what worked. Don't ask me why. I think it's, from my perspective, it's been diplomatic malpractice at the very least. The momentum after the Abraham Accords, after our policy on Iran was headed in absolutely the right direction. I think the Iranian regime was on its at its weakest state since 19 1979 when Trump left office. By any measure, the Iranian economy was in shambles. The Iranian GDP has declined by a third over the Trump years. The Iranian regime wasn't able to support its proxies, Hamas, Hezbollah, and everybody else, to the extent that they have in the past. That matters to Israel. You know, if Hezbollah, which it did, has to put out like charity boxes in local grocery stores to collect and fundraise because Iran isn't sending money anymore, that makes a difference to Israel. If Hamas wasn't getting, you know, $30 million a month from Iran, that changes the calculation as to what they're willing to do. So I think the obvious difference between one approach or another approach is, well, it makes a ton of difference as to what policies exist from the United States toward Israel. And as we've seen, the policies of the Biden administration have, unfortunately, empowered Israel's enemies, have made it easier for Iran's proxies to attack Israel, have meddled in Israel's domestic politics. You know, that is, I think that's unheard of in the past as far as the American policies go. Maybe, no, I shouldn't say that. Before Biden, Obama tried to do that. But the truth of the matter is, you know, you don't need me to answer that question. I think the Trump policies benefited Israel and benefited its neighbors, which made it possible to create a new formula for the Middle East, where Israel doesn't have to worry about Arab states every 5 minutes acting against them, instead building a future for both the Jewish people and the Arab people going forward. And the reversal of that has caused the opposite. Now you're seeing Israel's Arab neighbors hedging their bets. They're waiting to see what happens here. I think Caroline was absolutely right. Israel has to win decisively so that the Abraham Accord partners and future partners will have confidence that they're dealing with a stable government that can hold it together and make sure that whatever deals that they put together aren't going to be reversed, they're not going to be changed with every new administration. But that can only happen with a strong Israel and decisive victory. If Israel does not have a decisive victory, I think you will see Saudis make it much more expensive to make whatever deal is on the table. You will also see, the Emiratis, Moroccans, and Bahrainis, and others, potentially Malaysians, Indonesians, Omanis, reconsider whether their future is with Israel or whether they need to lean toward China, for example, or lean toward Russia. That is not good for Israel either. So I think, to make the long answer short, it makes a hell of a lot of difference.
I think we could have talked for another hour on this. There's a lot to discuss, but thank you so much for providing your insights. I think you've
Thank you so much, Alex. Thank you, Len. It seriously could have gone on for a much longer time. It's very, very important information. Everyone, please forgive me. We're supposed to have a break right now, but we have a minister here, and he's on time, and we'd like to be able to take advantage of him before he has to go. So we're going to be speaking right now for a few minutes with Minister Amichai Shikli, who is the Minister of Diaspora Affairs, who has his pulse on American Jewry, what's going on in the world. And then afterwards, we'll have the break. So, Minister Shikli, please. So, first of all, Minister, thank you so much for joining us this evening at our conference. The first question I wanted to ask you was, how do you explain the explosion of anti-Semitism on college campuses in the West, with Israel being the focus, but it's not really about Israel?
Inspiration and the sense that there is blood in the air. Meaning, October 7 created a momentum for Hamas supporters, for the jihadist supporters, for anti-Semites It sent a message that Israel is vulnerable, and this is now the time to attack her. This is not the time to go all the way against the state of Israel. And I think that one of the key facts that we need to remember is that the demonstrations against Israel in U.S. campuses and all across the globe started long before the ground operation in Gaza. This is one. And second, which is also very, very interesting, is that the day after, October 7th, you already can see that they have all the graphic design, all the slogans, everything was set, everything was ready. And this is also something that I think it's a bit optimistic, because it's not a natural response that is coming from the ground, but it is a well-orchestrated effort by organizations such as CARE, AMP, SJP, and other organizations who are, many of them are related, at least ideologically, to the Muslim Brotherhood, and we are examining to learn if their connection is more than ideological, but actually a direct link between them and Hamas or PFLP, etc., etc. So this is the one part of the question, and the second, I think, is that we can see the what we call the Red and Green Alliance once again, neo-Marxist radicals who hate the state of Israel, who hate the idea of nation states, who hate the idea of truth. And they are collaborating with the jihadists, just like they cooperated with the jihadists in 1979 against the Shah, that was mentioned a moment ago, regarding Iran, and as they do for many, many years. So now they have a momentum. I think this is also an opportunity. This is also an opportunity, and we can see many students all across the world who, especially now, care more about the Jewish identity, their Zionist identity. They are willing to fight back, to be proud Jews. And our main efforts in the Ministry of the Diaspora is to empower those students, is to support them, and all the organizations who are related to these kind of activities.
So as a follow-up to that question, since you're referring to the fact that it is a red-green, or as I call it, also the Marxist-Islamist alliance revolution, which is not just about Israel, but we're the canary in the coal mine of Israel. Right, the destruction of America and the West. What is Israel's role in bringing about a solution, understanding it's not just about us, but it's really a global warfare?
I think first and foremost is to be who we are in the deepest sense. It is not a coincidence that the neo-Marxists and the jihadists are against the state of Israel. I once had a fascinating conversation with Professor Shalom Rosenberg, who passed away a year and a half ago. And Professor Rosenberg said, pure goodness never appeared on the face of earth. Pure evil appeared in Auschwitz, Treblinka, and Maidan. Pure evil declared the Jews, the Jewish people, as its ultimate enemy. And to understand how true is that statement of Rosenberg, in his last will, Hitler says to the German people, it's all written, you can see it at the Yad Vashem website, he's writing, I urge you to continue the war to the German nation. The war against who? You would assume the Soviet tanks that surrounded his bunker. You would assume the Allies. No. Continue the war against Judaism. Ultimate evil, declare a war on the Jews as its ultimate enemy, and then Shalom Rosenberg said, we need to ask ourselves, how are we the enemy of evil? And I think that unlike 1948, the Independence War, or the Six-Day War, or the Yom Kippur War, there is something unique in October 7th, And this is the level of brutality, of barbarism, of evil that we have not witnessed since World War II. Pure evil. And I think that we should be very proud to be the enemies of pure evil and the enemies of everyone who supports Hamas. And I think that we represent the opposite of pure evil. It's to seek goodness. That is who we are. To seek the truth, to seek goodness. That is who we are as a Jewish people. And we should be proud of it. And Startup Nation is important, and many other things. But the core values of the Jewish people is the Ten Commandments. The core values of the Jewish people is the idea of freedom, of nation states. It's the deep connection to our homeland, to Judea and Samaria. And we need to, I think, to give up the idea of that we are a normal nation. We're not normal. Let's forget about it.
Amen. You are the Jewish people. So a great segue, because I wanted to ask you, especially as the Minister of Diaspora Affairs and with your heart on the pulse of diaspora Jewry, what do you think the diaspora Jewry needs to hear to better understand the importance of Judea, Samaria, even Gaza to Israel today? Not just on a security level, but even a deeper level.
So about Judea and Samaria, I think that the biggest problem we have in the diaspora is the fact that, for instance, in the largest community outside of Israel, in North America, if you're not coming from an Orthodox family, only 5% of the kids are going to Jewish schools. And this is our greatest challenge because it's all education. So you have beautiful projects. You have Birthright and you have the summer camps, and these are really powerful projects with a lot of impact, and I think it's really tremendously important. But it's not enough because eventually it's all about Gilsa de Antuta, and we need to teach the kids. They need to learn Torah. They need to know the Bible. They need to know the Sefer Torah. They need to be proud of their identity. How can you be proud if you don't know nothing about Jewish identity? And you think that this is all about Tikkun Olam, but the most important thing is to go and fix a house in Mexico. I am for Tikkun Olam, but we have some other missions before.
Right. I like to say, if anyone goes to the actual text, it's L'taken olam b'malchut shakai, and it's about the Jewish people making the world a better place in God's kingdom in the land of Israel.
So regarding Judea and Samaria, first you need to know who is Joshua, who is Caleb. By the way, I think the language. No Hebrew, no Tanakh. You cannot translate. Alo na'ale ve'arashnu אותה כי נכון נוכל לה. טובה הארץ. You cannot translate these words to any language.
Just to translate as best as possible, Jews go up and liberate and conquer your homeland. That's from the Bible. And final question, because I know your time is valuable, and we have to take a break here. Knowing we're in the middle of this war, knowing we don't know what's going to be up north, if, when, all a question mark, what is your message to Jews in Israel and around the world as we move forward as the Jewish people today?
First of all, I think that one of the most deepest idea of Judaism is to wake up in the morning and to say, whatever the circumstances, Modeh ani.
Thank you.
Thank for what we have. We have a state. We have a strong army. We have a strong nation. We have many young men and women, and not just young, who are committed, who are fighting in the IDF or in US campuses. And I believe in the future of our people and the message that we carry for thousands of years, which is relevant now more than ever. Lo Tirtzach is relevant now more than ever.
Don't kill.
Anochi Hashem Elokecha is relevant now more than ever against the relative morality perspective that destroy Western civilization. I think we have a crucial role as a nation today, and it's not a coincidence that we are being attacked so furiously from all across the world. But also, we have very good friends all across the world. We have election now. We had election now for the European Parliament, and you can see that those parties who stand by Israel, if it is Vox in Spain, or Partido Popular, or if it's Orban, or if it's many other conservative parties who support Israel, they all became more powerful. So there is a process of awakening, and October 7th had a huge impact on Europe, because for the first time, you could see, fast forward, what is the meaning of radical Islam. This is not a joke. This is not theory. It can be very, very serious. And I think that many people all across the West are opening their eyes and saying, Israel is fighting a just war. And we need to support, because it's our war as well. And I think there are many, many reasons to be optimistic about Gaza. I think that Hamas is in a terrible situation. I don't think we finished. We're not close to finish. There's a lot of work to do. It will be just like Chomat Magen, protective walls. So you have the intense period, and then you have at least a year of continuing until they are smashed enough. And we are on the way, and the soldiers are doing an amazing job. Up close. Yes, Hezbollah is a serious enemy. It's a serious enemy. A war with Hezbollah, it's not something that is, it's not a game. It's serious. But it's Hezbollah. Let's like tranquilo, as we say. Okay? We can win Hezbollah. We can win Hezbollah and Iran. We have the capabilities. We have the resource that we need. We need to be very picky on the timing. We need to choose how and when exactly, and to take the right decisions without panic, without being hysterical. Yeah. So I think there are many reasons why to be optimistic, and above all the reasons, our children, the children of our Israel, the good children that we have, and we're going to raise here in Israel, and I'm sure we're going to see many more Jews coming to Eretz Israel to make Aliyah, and I'm very optimistic.
Amen! Amen. Mr. Shidley, thank you so much. Everybody, a little late, but we have a 20-minute break. There's some food. Enjoy, and we'll be coming back in 20 minutes.
So what is the viable solution for existing in security and prosperity in the land of Israel? Basically, there are three models. One model is the separation model, which means we are on one side of the border, Palestinians on the other side. This we did in Gaza. Devastating. This model is not viable. If we would have done that in Judea and Samaria, Israel basically would have ceased to exist. If Hamas had 17 years to build in the mountains of Judea and Samaria, where we defeated empires, what they built in Gaza, in this shallow, small place on the sea, 20 IDF couldn't deal with this. It's not an option. Separation is not an option. So the next option is military control. Where did we see models of military control in the Middle East? Iraq.
Everyone gets in their seats. We will resume. We will resume the program. As you're taking your seats, I just want to say thank you to everyone who is still here with us. Again, the thousands that are watching online and everyone who is still here at the Begin Center in Jerusalem. All right, if everyone could be quiet, we're going to start with a video. So.
paramount to being Jewish, they want us to doubt ourselves. They want us to doubt facts. They want us to doubt history. They want us to doubt our Judaism. They want us to doubt how proud we are with our Judaism. They want us to doubt Israel. They want us to doubt the government of Israel. They want us to doubt the IDF. They want us to doubt each other. They want us to doubt our community. And for me, one of the most important things is arming myself with the facts and the history and the knowledge so there is no doubt. You know?
I'm in a mikvah in Gush Etzion, thousands of years old. All right? This is where we go, Jews, in the mikvah, to purify ourselves. For thousands of years, the Jews have been in this land, thousands of years. Okay? Does it look like it was made in 1948, 1958? This is Jewish land. It's been Jewish land for thousands. You think this started in 1948? You think this started in 1967, 2005? This is Jewish, ancient land. The greatest day, the single greatest accomplishment from Gaza was October 7th. The greatest thing, the greatest invention, the greatest contribution to their own society are the tunnels. That's the sea. Over there, it's Tel Aviv. That's the sea that you are talking about. Walk with me. That's the river. Over there, past Jordan, is the river. All right, that's the river, that's the sea. From the river to the sea. And I'm on the high mountains. First of all, you're not getting all this, you think you're getting from the river to the sea? That's not happening. And this idea of two-state solution, if we give you this, you see what you're on top of? You think you give terrorists a view of Tel Aviv, a view of Jerusalem, to shoot and at the people of Israel?
In the video, the Pulse of Israel is beyond honored and proud to award Michael Rappaport with the Brave Leadership of Zion Award for boldly standing up, speaking out the truths about Israel and the Jewish people, and spreading unapologetic Jewish pride despite the consequences. We salute you, Michael, for setting an example of Jewish bravery, strength, and pride for all Jews all over the world, because there's so many who really need it. Thank you, Michael. Come on up.
I appreciate that very much. I love that video. I will not be saying any of those bad words in here tonight. First of all, thanks for sticking around and through the intermission and everything. These are the real hardcore fans. The rest of them, they're missing out. What can I say? I really am happy to be here. I love this community. I respect this community. What can I say? I wrote some things down. First of all, I always have to lead with, because if this is ever seen by anybody outside of this room, I want to make sure I say the thing, which is seems to have been a bad word is free the hostages. That is the first thing and foremost thing, is free the hostages by any means necessary. I am honored to be here. I feel like I am at home. I feel like I am in home base. I am so comfortable in Israel. This is actually the first day of my wife and I's our fourth trip to Israel. And before November of 23, we had never been to Israel. Don't judge me, please. I grew up in New York City. I am what you would call a bagel and lox Jew, although I don't know any Jewish person or any person who likes bagels that would just have bagel and lox. So I consider myself a everything bagel toasted with cream cheese, tomato, capers, and onions Jew. But despite the fact that we never made it here before November, I know we are dedicated to making up for lost time going forward. You know, this is home. It feels like home. I feel so comfortable here every moment that we've been here, and to be totally honest, I can't even catch a cab by myself because I speak a horrible Hebrew, but I still feel so comfortable here. As lighthearted as that video was, you know, I always, you know, since my experience being here, you know, there's obviously such sadness and demoralization, and I think we're at 268 days that we've been all, and I know all you guys are dealing with it closer than any way that I'm dealing with it, just the heartbreak and the demoralizing, life-changing situation that is continuing since October 7th. The fact that there's so many people who have had families that have been destroyed, so many people that are suffering, so many people that haven't been able to mourn properly, because how can you mourn properly when this continues to go on? I think about all of them. I think about all of you. I pray every single day for them. I pray for the hostages. I pray for their families. I pray for the soldiers. I pray for the people in the north who are getting just lambasted every day. I've met so many people. I've met so many inspiring people. I've met and heard just tonight so many brilliant people, so many brilliant thinkers that inspire me. You know, when I said that clip in there about arming myself with knowledge, I have been doing that so much. And just tonight, you know, I just feel every time I hear some gems from people here in Israel, it just makes me feel stronger. I've met passionate, everyday people. I've met incredibly brave soldiers who always seem to have the best smiles ever, which I don't understand. Every single soldier that I met smiles beautifully. I've met regular, resilient Jewish men and women, and unfortunately also I've met so many heartbroken people. You know, with everything that's looming in the north, I'll be honest, I texted Carolyn Glick, who I am friendly with, and I said, yo, Carolyn, are we crazy for coming back right now? And her response was, and I quote, I don't think you're crazy to come back now. I'm going crazy because we're leaving, and I feel uncomfortable leaving. And I was like, that's the most Zionist shit I've ever heard. Sorry, that's the one curse, sorry. But I did feel I was like, because I'm like, I'm scared to go. And she's like, I'm feeling nuts because I have to leave. You know, in regards to what's going on in America, you know, I'm from New York City. I'm born and raised in New York City. And in the last 2 weeks, yeah, and I love New York. And for a lot of my life, I've always argued that New York is the greatest city in the world. No disrespect. But in the last 2 weeks alone, I literally had to say, is New York still the greatest city in the world? Because in the last 2 weeks alone, there has been so many embarrassing moments. There's been so many embarrassing moments in New York City since October 7th, when posters of hostages were being ripped down. And in the last 2 weeks, in the greatest city on earth, we've had 4 Jewish workers from the Brooklyn Museum have their homes vandalized in disgusting ways. There was a mob of people that went outside the Nova Music exhibit and were saying the most vile, nastiest, mean, insensitive things I've ever heard in public. And on that same day, a bunch of terrorist-loving, keffiyeh scarf-wearing, thrift store, Hamas costume kids got on a subway in New York City and asked if there's any Zionists on the train. If there's any Zionists on the train, now's your chance to get out. I was embarrassed, and I was like, can this still be the greatest city in the world? Is there any Zionists on the train? Is there any Zionists in here tonight? Do not worry about what's going on in New York. Do not worry about what's going on in the diaspora. It's funny because we worry so much about you guys, and you guys are like, what about those idiots running around the city? Don't worry about them. It's offensive. It needs to be dealt with. It is a problem. It can grow. It needs to be nipped in the butt. But right now, there's bigger fish to fry. It really did make me ask, is New York the greatest city? Because it doesn't feel that good right now, but Israel really does. And I don't need to say this because, one of the things that I have been saying to people in America is to never doubt your Judaism, to never doubt yourself, to never doubt your Judaism, because these terrorist people, they don't want to just prey on us physically, they want to prey on us mentally, and they want us to doubt ourselves, they want us to doubt each other, they want us to doubt our government, they want us to doubt other Jews, they want us to question ourselves, and do not do that. And I strongly, strongly urge, and I'm doing the same thing, to stick together, to be together, no matter what level, no matter what denomination, because it was proven on October 7th, it doesn't matter what kind of Jew you are, what kind of Jew you think you are. If Jews were in the line of fire on October 7th, you would be treated as a Jew. We must stand with each other more than ever. I am praying for the hostages. I'm praying for the families. I'm praying for the people of Israel. And I know you guys know this, but the Jews are never going anywhere. And Israel certainly isn't going anywhere. I'm Israel Chai. Thank you guys.
Everyone, Michael Rappaport, the real deal, a real strong-hearted Jew who really is an example for so many of us today. With that, we're going to have a little change in the program, and I want to invite up Shai Kalach to give us a few words. And this is very important. You have to understand who Shai is. For those of you who do not know, some of you in Israel might know him. Abroad, I don't know how many of you know him. Shai is a former IDF Air Force pilot, and really the only IDF Air Force pilot who was vocal against the refusal of Israeli soldiers, officers, and pilots during the whole judicial reform protest movement. He literally raised an organization from scratch on his own, raised money for public campaigns to make a difference and to out and shame those officers and pilots who were openly supporting refusal to serve and do their service. And a little known story that is important for people to know, and I heard this directly from Shai when he spoke about it. Shai was called up for Miluim, for IDF reserve duty on October 8th, and he went to his Air Force base. He still serves. He got to his base, and a number of his high commanding officers were very unhappy to see him, and they basically said, Shai, go home, we don't want you here. And Shai said, wait, what's going on? I came to serve, Miluim, it's war. He said, is this political? And they said, yes, it's political. So understand this for a second. The reality of our situation is we have a reserve Air Force soldier, the only one to publicly call out refusal to serve, and his high command threw him out of the army. Right? That just gives you an inkling of the challenge, of the internal challenges we are dealing with in Israel today. Israeli reporter Amit Segal heard about what happened and called Shai right away to verify if it's true. Shai said, yes, it's true, but do not publicize it, because this was in the beginning of the war, and unity of the Jewish people was more important to Shai than getting the truth out about what happened to him personally. And he didn't want to hurt the unification of Am Yisrael, the Jewish people, at the beginning of the war effort. But Amit Segal on his own basically called up the commanding officers of Israeli Air Force and said, if you do not give Shai his rollback in the Israeli Air Force, I'm going to publicize and shame all of you. And because of that, he was taken back to reserves, even though they gave him a different base and a different role than before. So Shai, if you could come and join us up here and give us a little more words for Israelis and Jews and non-Jews around the world to understand the challenge we're up against internally.
Thank you. Thank you very much. No one's here, so I would like to thank you, Avi, for having me. Avi, you're supposed to hear now. Okay, he's not here. So I would like to commend him for his perseverance at this conference, but he's not here. Okay. Okay. So thank you for. So first of all, thank you very much for coming, and thank you for having me. So we are staying with the honored guest. I would like to raise a question, with your permission. Where was the Air Force at October 7th? Was it a betrayal? Or whether it just was a bad preparation? And I think that even if the answer is yes, I mean, if there was a betrayal, I think it's irrelevant. I mean, I think it is not important. And I tell you why. Because what have we done with the traitors? Would have we hanged them in the middle of town square in Tel Aviv? What have we done? Would have our problems have been solved as a result of that? Of course not. And actually, we need to understand that we are in the middle of a process of sobering. I mean, we need to sober up. For 40 years of, I tried to find the word of conception, but actually the conception is conceptia. I mean, that we need to sober up from 40 years of conceptia. So even if the answer was yes, it wouldn't have done anything. So as to the question, I would like to tell you that the Air Force was exactly at the same place it was 40 years ago. Exactly the same place. It was attacking the main headquarters of Hamas around 7:20. I have a friend from my course, from my flight academy course, who served as a squadron commander, and he told me that at 7:20, the first airstrike took place. So, but again, it wasn't at the place it was supposed to be, I mean, on the border. Because, again, we are in the midst of a process of sobering of the conception. And I'm trying to ask myself, what is the source of the conception? And I think that since World War II, the world actually has been trying to achieve a global peace. What's a global peace? And actually, it has been adapting perceptions of globalization. It means simply that, to be a global village. So once we are all one big happy village, so there is no such thing as enemies. There is no enemies. Therefore, there is no need for victory. No enemies, no victory. So, ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the postmodern world. Welcome to the postmodern madness, where there is no point of truth, no point of certainty, where there is no good and no evil. So, in light of the fact that we are actually part of a postmodern experiment, I would like to raise another question. What is the danger we are faced with? And for me, the answer is simple. I think that the danger is, with no any exaggeration, the danger is an eradication of the Jewish identity. The danger is an eradication of the law of return. The danger is the eradication of the nationality law. And actually, as an eradication of our symbols, like our flag and our national anthem. And again, my friends, I think, in my opinion, that this is no exaggeration. We are facing the danger, actually, of the end of the Jewish state. And we need to understand that. So I would like to say, in the name of Rabbi Goldschmidt, have you heard about him? Who is the chief rabbi of the communities, of the European communities, who once said that, not according, leave the halakha aside. He said that not all Jews need to live in the state of Israel, but all Jews need a state of Israel. And I understand it in two main meanings. First of all, in terms of sense of security. Sense of security all over the world, like after the period after the 6-day war. Like, just walking down the street without any fear. Secondly, I understand it in terms of be a safe haven to the all Jews all over the world. If you have a problem, if there is a rise of an anti-Semitism, and there is like an anti-Semitism, a real anti-Semitism danger in the diaspora, you can pack your stuff, you can buy flying tickets, and you can come to Israel to be a citizen of Israel in a few hours. So I think that we should ask ourselves, how have we come to a situation of such confusion by which we are forced to face actually such an existential danger? And I think it's well connected to the understanding of why have we returned to Zion after 2,000 years of diaspora. Actually, to ask ourselves, what is the main purpose of the Zionism? As I'm sure you all know, that Herzl coined the term called a miklat batuach, a safe shelter, actually a safe haven. Safe haven simply means that we can have Jews, we can adapt Jews all over the world again in ours. But when we analyze this term, it stems from a negative place. It means simply that we should not be annihilated in Auschwitz. But if we seek a positive place, it has to be connected to a mission that we have to fulfill. It calls in Hebrew being Or Lagoim. Have you heard about it? It's the Rashar Hirsch, Rabbi Shimshon Raphael Hirschter. Or Lagoim, it simply means being a light to the nations. And more than that, there is Am Sgula. And what is Am Sgula? Am Sgula is that there should be one nation that can lead the world from a moral standpoint. So what became clear during the Holocaust? During the Holocaust became clear that we cannot live anymore in the diaspora. That we cannot live anymore without a sovereign state in the land of Israel. What has become clear during this war of 7th of October is that we cannot live, we cannot be a safe haven unless we clarify the true source of Zionism, which is well connected to the traditions, to the heritage, and actually to the history of the Jewish people. Thank you. And here I want to add in my own story, because I was born and raised as a typical kibbutznik, if you've ever heard this expression. And as I'm sure that there are no many kibbutzniks sitting here. So I would like to explain that instead of a regular bar mitzvah, we had a year of activities that would develop the basic human characteristic, like camaraderie and fellowship and self-sacrifice. And it was that year, what we learned during this year of activity, that motivated us to join the elite units of the army. This was the past generation. And indeed, 25% of the casualties of the Six-Day War were kibbutzniks. But today, what motivates the youth to join these elite units is actually the education and traditional values they receive at home, first and foremost, which continues in the 1 or 2 years in the special pre-army Torah academies. And unfortunately, we can see this in the casualties figures of this war. So we are talking about actually rediscovering our identity. And I think that the entire world needs to rediscover its identity. I would say, let's help America be great again. What has happened? I'm coming from a great appreciation to the foundation, to the cultural foundation of the founding fathers of the United States. A place which is, in my point of view, a source of liberty and freedom to the new Western world. So how has it come that we have reached to the woke culture in the great United States of America? It's a question. And I think it is a critical discussion that human society needs to have. That human society is increasingly devoid of a defining starting point for life. And this relates also to the definition of personal freedom for humans. What is the identity that underpins human society? That's the point. So let's take, for example, the famous debate 2 or 3 days ago between the two United States presidential candidates who claim they have a better solution to solve the world's problem. And I think that there is a need for an adaptive leadership. There is a very famous professor, Ron Heifetz, wrote actually not an article, and he differentiated between, it calls a technical challenge and adaptive challenge. A technical challenge simply means you are ill, you go to the doctor prescribes you a pill, you take the medicine, you become wealthy. That's great. An adaptive one, when you come to the doctor prescribes you a pill, but he also adds in, listen, actually, it's a lie. You are overweight, you barely sleep at night, and unless you change your lifestyle, you're gonna die. So let's take it to leadership. An adaptive leadership is needed when the world is in crisis. An adaptive leadership means that we should create an inspiration among individuals around the world. And I think that when I'm talking about rediscovering the identity of the entire world, we should not be afraid. You know, there is an afraid of nationalism. But when we analyze the nationalism, if we take it to the one end of the pinnacle, I mean to the one end of the scale, to the extreme, when you love yourself so much, so you can get to hate the entire world. This is how you can get to fascism and Nazism. And on the other extreme, when you love the world so much, you can actually get to self-hatred. But there is a solution. The solution is to start to be a Or Goim, to adapt the Israeli model, the Israeli role model of cosmopolitan nationalism. We love ourselves, we love Jews, and because we so love ourselves, we can love the whole world, the entire world. And this is why we help Turkey when they have earthquakes. This is why we help the Syrians when they had massacred by their tyrants. Whenever there is a need of a national disaster, Israel is always there. And just a few sentences to finish. I think that we have to realize that we have returned to the global politics. I mean, since 1948, we have returned to the global politics. Let's just presume, hypothetically, that we were to cancel the Balfour Declaration, or we were to cancel the decision of the Hever HaLeumim. How do you say Hever HaLeumim? The League of Nations. And let's just presume, hypothetically, that we were to cancel the decision of, I would say, the petition plan of the United Nations. Do we still have the right to live here as a sovereign state in the land of Israel? Of course. You think so? I do not think the world is actually mature to understand it. And I think that I think that this is the idea that we need to be, that is need to be developed, that when we have no independent vision, one that is not subject to the mercies of the world's nation, we lose actually international legitimacy. Because I believe that in the subconscious of the nations of the world, they are asking themselves whether we Jews are just conquerors from Europe that invaded to the Holy Land, or we are the nation that is supposed to be a Or Goim, nation who is supposed to fulfill the mission. That is the subconscious question of the world's nations. So we actually need to challenge the global consensus. which is anyway diminishing beyond our status as a high-tech powerhouse. The fact that the nations of the world recognize that we are unsure of our mission undermines our right to exist. So the world nowadays is ready to accept this news more than ever before, expecting us to adhere to the ethical code of Yoshua bin Nun, Joshua son of Nun, and not that one of Professor Asa Kasher. So I have a cousin, I'm finishing in 2 sentences. I have a cousin who served in the elite unit called Sayeret Matkal. Have you heard about it? And he told me years ago that the United States depends on Israel much more than we depend on it. And he actually meant by the intelligence meaning. And I'm saying, you know, we supplied intelligence to bring bin Laden and far more than that. And I'm saying it's not only a dependency in terms of intelligence, but in terms of moral message we have to offer the humanity. A message of significance for life. We have the responsibility of being the world's moral compass. And it is time we begin to articulate this to the world. So, in a world twisted by progressive monsters seeking control, we need to bring the message of certainty. And I have no doubt that this will bring huge benefit both for Israel and to the entire world. Just to know that leading the world, it's not just a matter of being a superpower. It's far more beyond. It's a question of being a source of inspiration. It's a question of being a source of morality, a source of certainty, and a source of existential meaning. Thank you very much.
As you can hear, Shai is an important voice that we need more Jews to hear in Israel and around the world. And we're going to end this evening with a focus on the next generation, the college students. Here in the Jewish state of Israel, we literally are fighting on the front lines for our existence, for the Jewish people worldwide, and for the whole freedom-loving world. Our sons, our friends, our neighbors, ourselves, we're literally warriors on the front lines, holding our guns and in battle. Today, there is another front line for the Jewish people, and believe it or not, it's the college campuses across the world, especially the United States of America. And those soldiers on the front lines who did not decide to be soldiers on that front line are our Jewish students of those college universities.
I'm Jordan Myers, Penn State.
This is Eitan Moore, everybody, and now I'm talking to Evan Cohen, also University of Michigan. I'm here with Shai Akev-Anfar from Los Angeles, who studies at Berkeley. All right, so here we are with Alex from Duke University.
Penn State's actually been kind of unique in the fact that a lot of our, anti-Zionism and anti-Semitism and just anti-Israel experiences have been out there in the open for everybody to see.
Members of the Penn Gaza Solidarity Encampment headed east towards police headquarters after leaving Penn's campus.
After October 7th, almost immediately, there was student groups claiming that the massacres that we saw, at Nova and Kibbutzim in the cities in the south, was justified acts of resistance. So rape was a justified resistance.
I think that we should all give an applaud right now to Hamas for a job well done. when they woke up in the morning and they found the field hands in the house with a knife ready to cut their throats.
Rape never, ever, by any means, is resistance. I think we all can agree to that. We all should agree to that.
I was late to the news, but when I heard it, I smiled. I don't want to hear that bull 250 innocent Israelis are dead.
And it's really difficult to see both students but also faculty. The university president put out a statement just after the 7th, basically, he saying how he connected with all of his counterparts at the research universities in Israel, with whom he has a connection, checking in to make sure they're okay, expressing condolences for what happened. And there was a letter signed by give or take 900 faculty, claiming that this is diminishing the Palestinians and that it's oppressing them effectively. This is immediately after October 7th.
Again, I swear, I salute Hamas. A job well done.
My school is an interesting place to be right now. It's definitely very hostile and violent, especially towards Jewish students, but also just like that is the energy on the campus right now.
And over in Berkeley, pro-Palestinian protesters took over an abandoned building at UC Berkeley yesterday. This came a day after the pro-Palestinian encampment was cleared there.
There's no room for discussion. There's no room for friendly debate. There's no room for civil conversation. And I think that's what hurts us most, because it's a screaming match, and that's not really what we're willing to do. We don't want to have screaming matches. We want to learn and have education and discuss with each other, hear new opinions, and we're not able to do that.
Creating a crowd of more than 1,000 people, carrying signs and waving flags.
But yes, just one day later, before Israel took any action, before the IDF went into Gaza, there was a crazy escalation in anti-Semitism. And it's because at the root of all of this, it's not actually that these protesters are anti-Israel or anti-Israeli government. It's because they hate the Jewish people, and they also hate American Western democratic values, which are the foundational values that America shares with Israel.
All of us here standing today are proud of what has occurred yesterday. What we saw yesterday morning was decolonization taking place, not terrorist attacks, and this was just a taste of it. The resistance is justified.
October 7th, the worst massacre of Jews in the Jewish homeland since the Holocaust. And instead of receiving sympathy or empathy, we are the ones being blamed. We're the ones feeling an unbelievable tsunami of hatred. And our college students, our poor college students, again, on the front line for the Jewish people, they just want to study, they just want to pass their finals, they just want to enjoy their college education, living and experiencing the fact that them being attacked for Israel, it's not about attacking Israel. They're being attacked for their Jewish identity. And that is something that many of these Jewish students have yet to internalize, even though a positive reaction has been a growth in Jewish identity by some, if not many, Jewish students on college campuses today. So let's hear more of the details of what some of these students have experienced on their campuses.
The worst time at MIT was the days and the month following October 7th, which is really before Israel had any type of significant reaction. And yeah, it was the worst then. Like days after October 7th, chance for intifada, globalized the intifada. How can you feel safe as a Jewish or an Israeli student?
My older sister, she was one of the organizers of bringing a speaker to our campus from Israel, and it caused huge riots, and they shattered glass windows. They tried to come in through a side door, and my friend was brave enough to go and try to close the door. She was strangled.
Strangled, physically?
My sister had to push-pull door.
Because they were trying to get in?
Yeah, because they were trying to get in. Her arm was sprained. After, she had to go to urgent care. And we had to be escorted out through a tunnel under the event.
These Jewish students of ours on these college campuses, again, they are the front line of the Jewish people today. Just recently, we've seen pogroms in the streets of Los Angeles. It's not only in the college campuses or the campus centers anymore, or university buildings, it's now in Jewish communities. Please God, it should stop. Unfortunately, it doesn't look like that. It looks like it's just escalating. The least we can do is do what we can to assist our Jewish students on campuses, not only to be able to stand up against the daily lies, but assist them to go on the offense with the proud Jewish story of who we are, why we are in Israel, why we are doing what we're doing, to feel pride in their Jewish identity and pride in the Jewish and ancestral Jewish homeland of Israel.
It feels like we're on the defensive all the time. It's important that we are on the offensive, and so, at the University of Michigan, for example, we're working very hard over the summer to, regroup, to think about our strategies for how can we be on the offensive going forward, so that we're not just, taking hits here and there, and that, we can be very proud, we can be supporting students in the most effective, best ways possible.
I try to stand up as much as I can. I'm going to be in student government next year. I was elected senator. And also, actually, I just want to give hope that maybe we're the silent majority, because there are 36 candidates and I got the second most votes behind the Muslim student representative.
Wow.
And I was the known Jewish student representative.
Often as individuals, we feel like we can't have an impact. There are so many people and there's so much hate going around. And every person can have a super large impact. It's important to have your voice heard.
Personally, I've been fighting this fight for a long time. I've been an advocate for Israel for a long time, and as I said earlier today, because I'm not serving in the army like all of my counterparts in Israel my age are, my mission has always been to be the loudest voice for Israel and for the Jewish people from where I am in America.
These are only some of the occurrences and some of the Jew-hating incidents that have taken place on some of the college campuses, which is why we at the Pulse of Israel are launching a special Pulse of Israel Warriors project. So that, as I started by saying, we in Israel are actual warriors with our guns as necessary to stand up and defend the Jewish people and be on the front line for the whole freedom of the world, where we want our fellow Jewish students on campus to be warriors as well. Not just warriors with a shield to defend, but to have the proud Jewish lion, King David spirit to stand up for themselves and provide that pride for their fellow Jewish students who aren't necessarily able to stand up proudly, but at least to feel it inside themselves and not feel embarrassed by the Jewish identity. So take a look at this project we're launching right now. Jews worldwide today feel trapped as victims of the most virulent hatred since the Holocaust. They are confused about why they are having to defend their very existence as Jews. Some have even lost friends, and they are realizing their lack of engagement with our people in Israel and our ancestral homeland of Israel has left them in the dark. So where are all the Jewish educational institutions and organizations that operate on college campuses, and what in the world have they been doing all these decades with our children who then proceed to college? Why are so many Jewish kids today without the tools to advocate for themselves? Sporting teams have an offense and a defensive line of players. No game can be won with only one of them. So why do organizations today mostly only play defense, highly focused on fighting the daily lies about Israel and the Jewish people? At Pulse of Israel, we are going to change the approach and go on the offensive with young adults from coast to coast. We recognize that at the core of the growing anti-Semitism today is the Palestinian national movement. Our goal is to work with students, your children or grandchildren, and coach them so they have a clear understanding of the history of our people in the land of Israel, and the history of our people as it relates to global policies and the war against Israel and the Jewish people today. We do this in a way that will give them the tools to effectively engage in being vocal. Being a strong Jew is necessary now more than ever. And we know how very scary it is for these kids in the public atmosphere today. the Pulse of Israel Warriors Project will work with high school and college students so that they can effectively engage both the obvious anti-Semitism and the nuanced anti-Semitism that they may even encounter in a classroom setting. And this refers to a professor who takes a political stance in front of the whole class being aligned with the enemies of Israel. How should a student respond in such a situation? In addition to providing daily communications featuring top viral ideas for posts, weekly mentorships and monthly Q&A sessions with influencers and thought leaders will also be made available for the students. We are going to work with the young warriors and give them the tools necessary to address any anti-Semitic encounter they may have while in high school or in college. We anticipate that this will have a multiplied effect and will in turn inspire thousands of students from coast to coast of the United States to want to engage with our Pulse of Israel Warriors project. The advantage of approaching anti-Semitism in this way, which is unlike any other organization that engages high school or college students today, will help to instill a Jewish pride that establishes a natural connection through the information and tools they receive to their brothers and sisters in Israel and their ancestral homeland. Join us today.
That's another project that obviously we're looking for supporters, and we'd love any of you $1 million donors who are pulling your money out of universities to give that money to us instead to save the college students. So you could just stand up. All right, it's been a long night, and I'm very thankful for all of you for being with us again here in Jerusalem or online. And to finish up, I just want to sum a few of the notes from this evening. October 7th woke up Jews around the world to realize that our enemies do not kill us because of where we live, but because we are Jews. Despite the protests in the streets and the headlines in the media highlighting these protests, I firmly believe that the majority of the Jewish people in Israel today are unified. More unified than we have possibly ever been in all of our history. All one has to look at the Jewish history. We were all over the place, all different segments. You look at Israel today, you do not listen to the headlines, you do not listen to the news. You go to the streets, you know as I know, you go to the streets of Jerusalem, Tel Aviv, Hadera, Tzfat. You see all types of Jews walking around, shopping together, in hospitals, in health centers. We are more unified than ever before. All we have to do is just shut out the news. Unfortunately, as always, there still exists a tiny yet powerful and rich elite that tries to harm our unity and stop us from fulfilling our purpose as the Jewish people, back as sovereign in our ancestral homeland, but we will overcome. Just a few weeks ago, I made a Pulse of Israel video about the fact that literally after 76 years, Israel finally has a TV program that counted the Omer every night with a blessing, as well as the addendum of praying for the rebuilding of the temple and the work in the temple. The first time in 76 years. Right? So on the one hand, you could say, why did it take so long? But then you say, okay, it did take that long because of where we are, but it's finally happening. The Jewish people are thirsting for that, and we finally have that. It's a process taking place. We are part of a holy, holy process, and those of us living here are blessed to be part of that process and raising our children and grandchildren to be part of that process. And my children's generation know that one day we will have homes in Gaza. My children's generation know that one day, and very possibly during their lifetime, we will be rebuilding the temple in Jerusalem. For them, it is no longer just a prayer that we are ignoring. For them, reality is meeting up with spirituality in a way that we have never experienced before in modern Jewish history. We are home. Too many Jews continue to ignore the religious basis of the war against us, literally ignoring the chants of Khaybar, Khaybar, Ya Yehud, Muhammad's army will return to massacre us, as they chanted thousands of years ago. Yes, it's a religious war. It always has been a religious war, and it is our children and their generation who are on the front lines fighting this religious war, as each day more Jews and non-Jews wake up to understand this. Because ultimately, as they all, the first time, as our enemies say, first they come for the Saturday people, and then they come for the Sunday people. It's just our leaders who ignore that. But we at the Pulse of Israel are here to help wake up more people to this reality and no longer ignore it. And I want to end with the following words. Number one, a strong and optimistic future for the Jewish state of Israel is possible based on the following principles. One, all the land from the river to the sea belongs to the Jewish people, our ancestral homeland, where we are in the process of building up our third Jewish Commonwealth, 76 years old, yet over 3,500 years old. 76 years young, yet 3,500 years old. Our purpose here, this is number two, is specifically to be a proud Jewish state, an example to the world of a fusion of spirituality and realpolitik, not a nation state like any other, embarrassed by our Jewish identity. Number three, there is no historic people called Palestinians with a historic claim to the Jewish homeland. And number four, a strong, freedom-loving world needs a strong and secure and proud Jewish state of Israel, since we are the front line for the freedom-loving world against the growing Marxist Islamist revolution, out to destroy the whole freedom-loving world as we know it, and as we spoke about earlier, we're just the front line, the canary in the coal mine. Peace is impossible if based on lies. Impossible. That's why the Western world has failed time after time, peace agreement after peace deal. But as my teacher, and I'm proud to call him a teacher, Dr. Mordechai Kedar always says, a short-term peace with our enemies is possible in the Middle East if Israel is strong for the short term, while a long-term peace is possible in the Middle East with Israel being invincible forever. So my call to everyone is to be part of the spiritual revolution taking place. Be part of the solution of strengthening our Jewish identity and the Jewish identity of the state of Israel. It is up to us, not to our leaders, not to our politicians, not to our military leaders, not to our organizational leaders. It's up to you and me. And if you are a Jew, not yet living in Israel, and this is to everyone watching all over the world, it is time to come home. Why? To play an active role in this spiritual process. As a rabbi of mine who I grew up with, Rabbi Riskin, always says, you do not want to be on the sidelines. You want to be on the playing field. The playing field for the Jewish people is Israel. Because Israel is the solution. So start making your Aliyah plans now. Not to run away from the growing Jew-hating anti-Semitism in the West, but to come home and be a Jewish realist in continuing the miracle of the Jewish people back as sovereign in our ancestral homeland. And remember, Hashem oz la'amo yiten, Hashem yivarech et amo b'shalom. Hashem gives us strength, and it is with that strength that peace will come, not by being weak in our Jewish identity or by appeasing our enemies, but by being strong and proud of our Jewish identity, and by being an invincible power of King David-like warriors, as our children are today, that places fear in our enemies to never lift a finger against us. Am Yisrael Chai. And as a final thank you to everyone for coming, to all the supporters who made this happen, especially to Ken Abramowitz, to my family, to my parents, to my staff, to Rachel Moore, to my partner Avi Nadel, and to God above for everything. Laila Tov, everyone. Thanks for being at the second annual conference of the Pulse of Israel. Yes. Penima nefesh Yehudi homiya ufate mizrach kadima ayin letzion Sophia od lo Tikvatenu Hatikva bat shnot alpayim Liot am chofshi be'artzeinu Eretz Zion Yerushalayim להיות עם קודשי בארצנו, ארץ ציון ירושלים. אני מאמין באמונה שלמה בביאת המשיח. אני מאמין, אני מאמין באמונה שלמה בביאת המשיח. אני מאמין ואף על פי שיתמרר עם כל זה אחכה לו בכל יום שיבוא, בכל יום שיבוא. ואף על פי שיתמרר עם כל זה אחכה לו בכל יום שיבוא, בכל יום שיבוא. תם הטקס. לילה טוב, everybody.